let me take the pleasure to introduce a man who's, well, it almost feels like a weird arms race this week, because we've had a lot of big records in here, and we're still going to have a couple more, but I'm pretty sure out of these records, no one has made them sound bigger than the man who I'd like you to join me in welcoming right now, Mr. Trevor Horn, please.
Hello.
Hello. Now, in preparing this thing, I think I tried to concentrate on the most important bits, and the essential playlist features only 52 tracks now. So, bathroom breaks? No. It's going to be painful and long, but we try to...
You're not playing all 52 of them, are you?
I guess I already tried to exemplify a little bit, and I think we're just going to concentrate on a few of them. But there's actually one track in there which is not by you, and I would like you, probably while we start playing it, and listen to it for a second, afterwards elaborate on why we should care about a song like that. So, I presume this is on here. So, if you were a radio DJ, what would you say right after the song now?
Oh, I'd say that was Dionne Warwick singing Walk On By, written by Bacharach and David. First released, I think, in probably 1963, 64. I don't know the exact date. It's the first record that really, apart from the Beatles, that really got to me. I love that record. It's such a beautiful song, and I've always loved the way she sings. She sings very straight, like a saxophone. She doesn't sort of mess around and jump all over the place, you know. Well, she does a few little jumps, but it's an amazing voice. I always think of voices like the tip of an iceberg. There's a whole load more underneath it, but you hear the top of it, and it's beautiful.
So it's probably pretty much the contrast to what you would see in like a TV casting show these days.
Oh, God, yes, it would be the opposite, yeah. Well, I mean, some people do a lot of it. I think it's called melisma or something. Some people like to do that. She still sings. She's an amazing singer. In fact, I got to speak to her on the phone because I did some music for a movie, Ali, you know, where Will Smith played Ali. I did the first 12 minutes of the music, and it was a Sam Cooke concert, and the only person that we could find to sing it was her son, funnily enough, and we only found him the day before he was due to join the LA police force, which was a rather odd thing. He said, if you hadn't got me this gig, I would have been in the police. So I said, does that mean we can't smoke this? He said, no, you're all right.
Yeah, but I mean, it's legal in LA anyway these days, so yeah.
And Sam Cooke sang so high, you know, if you listen to something like Bring It All Back Home, he actually sings it in the key of C, and so he's singing top Cs, you know, in full voice, which takes some doing.
Yeah, I mean, normal vocalists would have to go to falsetto straight away after like what?
After
FJ
about
or whatever.
Yeah, after about an A, probably a lot of guys have to sing in falsetto.
Yeah. Any other Sam Cooke recommendations on that note?
Well, yeah, if you're into Sam Cooke, the best thing to listen to of Sam Cooke's is a live show that he did in Miami. It's the one that we copied for that film. It's quite amazing. He was. A lot of those singers were good though because they grew up singing in church, like Dionne Warwick grew up singing in church, and so they really learn how to sing.
Yeah, and how to take care of their voice.
Yes,
so,
exactly.
Excuse me for the lozenge break. Where were you around that time when you heard that record?
I was actually when I first heard that record, I was playing with the youth orchestra. I used to play double bass, and I was away at a sort of similar kind of thing to this. When you're in an orchestra when you're young, they take you away for the weekend. And we used to stay in a castle and rehearse a piece of music and then give a concert on the Sunday afternoon. And I heard that record. I was just listening to that record all the time because I liked it so much and thinking, that's the kind of music I want to do. not this. This is too hard. We were doing Tchaikovsky's First Symphony, and it has a hell of a bass part in it.
So, how did your bass playing career evolve from Tchaikovsky then?
Well, you see, my dad was a bass player part time. You know, he used to sort of play 5 nights a week to earn extra money. And when I was a kid, I taught myself. I learned to play the recorder. You know, I think is it called the same as a recorder, little flute thing. I really had no idea that I was particularly musical, because the way they taught us music at school was so boring that I wasn't interested. But when I got the recorder, I really got into it, and they used to have me playing recorder with every day for the hymns, you know, when we sang in before school, and that was. And I suppose I learned from playing the recorder. I learned how to read for the bass, because my father played bass. He showed me how to play Way Down Upon the Swanee River, and I kind of worked it out from there. And I used to dep for him, you know. When I was 12, sometimes if he couldn't make the first set with his dance band, I'd go and play the first set. And but then, you know, when I was about 13, he got a bass guitar, and bass guitars were so different to the double bass. My father was thrilled with it, because he said, what's great about the bass guitar now is all those guys that used to spend years bluffing on the double bass because you couldn't hear them, now you can really hear them, and so they better play the right notes. And and so by the time I was sort of 16 or 17, I was like the only guy around who could read for the bass guitar. Lots of people could play rock and roll on it, but I could actually read, so I could do work in dance bands and things like that. And that's kind of how I started playing all of that, you know, old Frank Sinatra stuff.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, when you're saying dance band, like what era are we talking there, and what were the tunes that you learned first to play on the bass guitar?
I've got you under my skin, you know, old Frank Sinatra, Bing Crosby, Dean Martin, you know, all of that stuff from the 50s and the 40s. And, you know, there was some great dance band music. There were, you know, like my father's favourite band was Tommy Dorsey. And there were things like, you know, When the Quail Went to San Quentin. Have you ever heard that? Summit Ridge Drive, all those sorts of things.
And what would a dance look like where you played?
Lots of old people kind of doing this sort of thing, you know. I used to get very bored with it. I used to practice letting my nose run and seeing how far it would go and things like that. So I was so bored. And I used to get into trouble because a couple of times I got a bit drunk and I was rude to the drummer. I remember my father telling me off for that. So I was only 15. But I guess the thing was I used to get paid for it. Because what I really wanted to do at that particular point in time is I really wanted to be Bob Dylan. And I was a completely unashamed Bob Dylan imitator. I had the harmonica and I could sing any Bob Dylan song, just about, you know, up to sort of 1964, 65, 66, before he did John Wesley Hardin.
So do we need to get a guitar in here and you give us your Bob Dylan renditions?
I don't think so. You don't really want to hear it. I mean, nobody can see it. I've often thought it'd be a great idea to get Bob Dylan to do something like, you know, Bob Dylan sings the songs of Diane Warren, you know, or something like that. Love lifts us up when we belong. You know, some corny old tunes. But anyway.
Let's jump ahead a little bit, and here is something that we found in the depths of the internet, and maybe you can elaborate a little bit on it.
I think I played bass on that. Did I? I haven't heard that for a long time.
Well, actually, there's a C.Horn and a T.Horn credited on that record, and am I right? Do you have like another sibling or
nobody that plays? That's called juke joint bop or something, isn't it?
Something like that, yeah.
I think it was just something I played on when I was a session guy. A friend of mine, Rod, used to write those kind of songs. Seems to. God, I haven't heard that for a long time.
How did you get to be a session guy then?
Well, you see, there's all different kinds of session guys. I used to do a lot of sessions because I could read. So, you know, I do those awful albums that you see in the shops, you know, where it's 30 pop hits, you know, they used to be 30 pop hits for like $2, you know. And
you mean the ones where you're really annoyed when you're a kid and you're spending like five currency whatever of your pocket money and like, that's not what I wanted. No.
Absolutely, yeah. But they used to pay good money, and you used to have to do them very quickly. You do something like 12 songs in an afternoon. And I used to play bass on them, but I also for a brief period of time, I did Brian Ferry's songs as well. They used to say, you're the only guy we can find who sings out of tune. Because Brian Ferry sings, I mean, God bless him, sings out of tune. So I do the Brian Ferry songs. And the funny thing was, we used to do them all in one take. You know, you just wait outside and then you go in and it would be, you know, let's stick together, come on, let's stick together. And then it was done. And I remember being in a restaurant one time and some music was playing and I thought, Jesus, that's awful. What the hell is that? It was me singing Tokyo Joe. So... Well, I did other kinds of sessions too, but you know, I played on radio jingles, and even after I had the first hit as a producer, I would still hear jingles that I played the bass on. You know, that were still going years later. But you only get one payment, so.
Here's another one from those session days.
Which, believe me, was a dangerous occupation.
In what respect?
Well, Tina could drink more than most men that I know, and when she'd had a few drinks, she could cause more trouble than anybody I ever knew. But she was a good singer.
Are you still bruised?
Pardon? Part of me is, yes. Funny enough, I met her again a few years ago. She came and sang with us. She hadn't changed one bit, really. I still like her, but you know, she was kind of crazy. And that was a B-side because her producer was a guy called Bidoo. And he was an Indian guy. He was a good producer. He produced Kung Fu Fighting. You know, everybody was Kung Fu, that one. And I Love to Love. She did I Love to Love whilst I was living with her. In fact.
How did that make you feel then?
Well, I didn't play on it. I thought it was great when Bidoo played me the song. I mean, I was, you know, back then I was very much Tina Charles's boyfriend. I wasn't, you know, a producer or anything, and so, you know, I was kind of always behind her or in the corner of the room. And I Love to Love. When Bidoo played her the song, I told her that's a really good song. But what was more important was she came home with a backing track, and it was the first time in my life that I'd ever heard a backing track. And I mean, that sounds kind of funny. But I was trying to produce records, and I wasn't doing very well with it because I didn't find it easy at first, and I couldn't quite get the backing track right. And listening to the backing track for I Love to Love was like a really educative thing for me. I learned so much from it. It was so simple. It was cold. It was clear. Nobody played anything that they shouldn't play. You know, I studied it and I learned a lot from it, but I never played on her records. Now, I think that was the first one of hers that I played on, and Bidoo just let us do it as a B-side, you know, just to keep her happy. Right. So that was Tina.
Oops.
That's a guy called John Howard, right?
That's what it says, yeah.
Did I produce that?
I was just double checking because it's like the first time you're actually credited as a producer.
I think you did produce that, yeah.
So,
well, Bidoo had produced John Howard before, but Bidoo was a good dance producer, but he wasn't very good with artists, because producing dance records and producing artists is an entirely different thing. So I did about 3 or 4 tracks with him, and that was one of them. They turned out pretty well, and he got a deal with them, but I don't think they sold. He was a lovely guy, very gay, very over-the-top camp, and he's still going. He's still going. He wrote to me last week, funny enough, to invite me to something, so I still stay in touch with him. I haven't heard that one for a long time, though.
It's kind of interesting. I mean, looking back now, obviously we might not have like the right notion of where it stands in the point of time, but it definitely draws from like the Steely Dance and certain West Coast kind of things on the other hand and all that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah, Steely Dan. But Steely Dan, we loved Steely Dan. I mean, in the 70s, those records were if you were a musician, they were so good because they were pop, but they were great pop, you know.
What made them great pop for you?
Well, the arrangements, the way people played, the chord structures, the intelligence of the lyrics, it was just great stuff, you know. An album like Pretzel Logic, it sounded so good too. They really made an effort to make the record sound good. And I think, you know, there were a few people around like that, you know, 10cc as well were sounded great back then. So I guess, yeah, that.
And
it's funny you're playing this style. I haven't heard these for ages. I don't.
Now the next one, probably we played quickly off here, and then we moved to your computer there, because people. Now this one, if you were a 3 or 4 year old boy, at the end of the 70s, strapped in your mom's car in the back seat, this was your tune. Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, not only the biggest tune in Talfunks Volkswagens, but also the first song ever to be played on MTV, I believe.
Well, it was perfect for them, wasn't it? Because it sort of was their manifesto in a way. I know, I had no idea that what it would turn into when we did it. But I wrote the song originally with a guy called Bruce Woolley. I started writing songs. I was working as a producer, but I didn't write songs. I used to fix people's songs up. And I discovered very early on that if somebody has a song that they've written and it's not right, and you rewrite it for them, especially if they're amateurs, as long as you don't claim any of the credit, they're really happy. They don't mind. And they kind of start pretending it's theirs. I was astonished. But it can be a way of solving a problem, you know, if you've got a problem with a song. So I was fixing people's songs, and then I thought, this is stupid. I should start writing songs again, you know. And I had that. Bruce and I had that lyric. I heard you on the wireless back in '52, but we couldn't figure out where to go to from it. You know, it's a funny line. And we were reading lots of science fiction. And if you ever read a guy called J.G. Ballard, we were really reading J.G. Ballard a lot. And also listening to Kraftwerk. Kraftwerk Man Machine was a huge influence at the time. You know, we just played it all the time because it was so different. And you know, at the end of the '70s, it was either rock, you know, Led Zeppelin, Elton John, and all that crew, or it was punk. And I hated punk. I mean, I did, you know, because it was so unmusical. And I once went to a show, and I actually found myself throwing stuff at the band because I was so angry at how awful it was.
What band was that, for the record?
I think The Unwanted, I think they were called. And it was a song called Buried Underground. 10 feet underground, decomposing. I was like, get the fuck out of it. It's dreadful. And so I hated punk. I didn't like rock because the rock guys were all rock gods. They were all maestros, and I didn't feel like I was a maestro. But Kraftwerk was like, you could see the future when you heard Kraftwerk. You could see, God, there's something new coming, something different. And, you know, different rhythm section, just a different mentality. So we had all of that. Myself and Bruce had that. And we actually wrote this song probably 6 months before we recorded it. And we were just walking in the park one day, and you know the way if you write lyrics, sometimes you can spend days looking for a line, and then it just goes bang, and there it is. And I said to Bruce, I've got it. Lying awake, intently tuning in on you. If I was young, it didn't stop you coming through. And then the whole thing about taking the credit for your second symphony rewritten by machine with new technology, and now I understand the problems you could see. That's what I could feel was coming, that it was all going to change, and technology was going to change the way music sounded. But the problem was, for me and Jeffrey, we had no access to any technology. We tried renting an Oberheim sequencer once, and I remember it cost me £15, which is £15 that I didn't really have, and I couldn't get the damn thing to work. I couldn't get a note out of it. It came with a manual that was German or part in German. It was really hard to operate. So we figured out ways of faking it by playing like a sequencer and putting echoes on things, you know. And if you had an echo, you could sort of make something sound a bit like a sequencer. So even though, you know, Video Killed the Radio Star was recorded in 1979, it's all played. There's no computers anywhere around the place, which is kind of funny because it sounds like it was sequenced. But that was what we were trying to do. The other problem that we had with that back then was I didn't know how to edit 2-inch multitracks. In fact, nobody had told me that you could do such a thing. I actually learned a lot about editing 2-inch multitracks from Yes when I did 90125, because they would edit multitracks like you know, to correct the drums. They'd take 1/4 of an inch out. I'd never seen that done before. So this meant, and the 16-track machine or 24-track machine we did it on was very primitive, so you couldn't drop in. So you had to play the thing from one end to the other without a mistake. And I think by the time we got the backing track for this, we'd been playing it for nearly 12 hours, which is a long time, and the drummer was really angry. And we had to put him on triple rate to get him to stay, because he kept saying, "You're fucking mad, I'm going, I'm not playing this anymore, my hands are hurting." I said, "Please, you know, please, just have one more go." And Hans Zimmer was in the control room. He wasn't playing on it, but he was in the control room. And so it was me, Jeffrey Downs, and a drummer called Paul Robinson. And I brought the multitrack with me because I thought it might be interesting for you to hear what went down first, or a bit of it. Anyway, we didn't want to hear the whole thing. Is that okay,
I mean,
Tim?
if
So
that's
is this
kind
Tim?
of okay,
Tim Widener. Yeah. Tim's been my engineer on and off for 20 years, so I hope this is not too boring for him. So this is what went down. That's it. Yeah, you get the idea anyway. Actually, that tape effect wasn't there. That's just us rewinding a tape machine and recording it.
Yeah, I guess it might be probably worth putting that multi-track later on the desk over in the other room or so, and then maybe give it a little re-wrap or so.
Yeah, sure. As long as nobody nicks it, I'm fine with it. As long as nobody steals it, because I don't really want it on the internet. But yeah, it's just piano, bass, and drums. It's funny when I listen back to it.
Nice. So. Yeah, you were mentioning a certain young man from Frankfurt in there later who still claims his participation in this track to up his street credit these days.
Well, he did participate in it. He was there. He was part of the band at the time. The thing was, Jeffrey was such a great keyboard player that there wasn't really any room for Hans to play the keyboards. But Hans still is one of the most charming, nice people I've ever met. So he was great to have around. Although I must say, after we did that take, he said, "I don't think this is the one." And Jeffrey and I went, "It's the one."
Yeah, but how did he get into the group or into the room in the first place? I mean,
Hans. Well, Hans had a Prophet 5, and we'd only had a Polymoog up to that point. The Polymoog was a bit unstable, and it was a little bit limited. It couldn't remember sounds. The Prophet 5 was the first synth I saw that would remember a sound. You know, you spend ages programming a sound, and you could keep it in a bank. And Hans, the thing that Hans was always great at was he always got great sounds, you know. He was a great programmer. And funny enough, he actually, there was a track on the first Buggles album that he persuaded us to play. He recorded some time code. He explained that that if we played to a click, which he laid down, then he would be able to overdub keyboards and lock the keyboards to the tape. And I was like, what? You mean have the keyboards play afterwards in time? Yes. I can't. How? I don't understand how that could be possible. There was a track called Johnny on the Monorail or something on the first album. So we spent ages, we recorded it to this click of his, and then Hans disappeared off into a room at the side. We didn't see him for a week. And then he came back, and he'd done all of these overdubs that ran, you know, that big rack of synths that he has in his place, and they were all banging away. And playing with Johnny on the monorail, relatively in time. I mean, not perfectly in time, but pretty much in time. The problem was, I didn't like any of the overdubs, so we didn't use it. We'd already more or less finished it, playing it by hand. It took me a long time to get into the idea. I still don't like MIDI very much. I find MIDI a bit inaccurate. You know, you can hear it sloppy.
You mean unlike the Hollywood people?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. We were talking about this last night because Hans really he was into programming. That's what he was very good at. And when he first went to LA, that was what he did. That was so different to everyone else. He could do a piece of score, and it was all in MIDI. And if you've ever worked in film, it's a crazy business, and they're constantly changing everything, constantly cutting bits out of the scene. And if you're an old style composer, you know, where you have the orchestration and it's hell, you know, getting the cues to fit. And Hans was the first guy that had a great big MIDI rig that could change cues instantaneously and could fake an orchestra in a convincing way. And of course, they loved it out there. That's why he's a franchise now. He has like 20 guys working for him. And if you ever get the chance to go and work for him, I strongly recommend that you do, because he's a lovely man and he's helped a lot of people. You know, people like Harry Gregson Williams started programming for Hans. He's not a selfish, egotistical arsehole, you know, he's a good guy. I mean, some of those guys can be a bit like that, but he's nice. And if you ever get the chance, do it.
Yeah, and there's a good chance there's a Grammy involved for you as well.
Oh, for me?
No, I mean, no, you got yours later. No, yeah. Like
well, it
Grammy
depends.
on Oscar.
It depends if you can take the pressure, you know, because when you're working on I've done a couple of films and they're not easy, and the people can drive you mad. And I think it's the most exhausted I've ever been. I did a film called Coyote Ugly. I did the music for that years ago. And I think that was one of the hardest things I ever had to do in terms of hours. I saw Hans the other week, actually. He came, we did a sort of Buggles gig, and Hans came, and I said to him, you know, that film thing, Hans, it's not going anywhere, man. You should come and join the band again. Forget it. He was doing Sherlock Holmes, you know, the new Sherlock Holmes film.
Well, I do feel like we're rushing a little bit, but we're only at 5 out of 50. And like I said, this is just the essence.
Yeah. That's Malcolm McLaren. It's double Dutch. That was 1982. I mean, I just done ABC, Lexicon of Love, and everybody wanted me to do another record like that. And Malcolm wanted to do a solo album. And my wife, who was my manager at the time, said to me, well, you can do Spandau Ballet. You know it'll be successful because they're a really good band. If you do this Malcolm McLaren thing, God knows what's going to happen, because he's a weird guy. And
can you probably fill us in quickly what he did before?
Pardon?
Like the things that he did before up until
Malcolm was the Sex Pistols manager, and he was the guy that, you know, got them to swear on TV and designed all their clothes. He was an amazing guy to be with. He was so mad in a way, but funny and great ideas. And I went to, you know, I had him over. My wife was had been a school teacher, maths teacher, Jill, and she wanted to tell him off for punk rock, basically. She wanted to have a go at him, but when we met him, we were both so taken with him, because he showed up, he had one of those funny Buffalo Girls hats on, you know, and he had a pair of trousers that sort of hung down at the back that looked as though he'd pooed in them. He looked very strange, but he was so funny, and he played me some music that I'd never heard before at the time. And he told me some stuff that I took my breath away. He said that all the black kids in New York were listening to Depeche Mode. I was like, what? what? I don't get that. And he said, and they do this thing with records, they scratch records. And he played me part of that tape that you heard at the start there, the world's famous Supreme team with Jessalada Superstar and whatever. The world's famous Supreme team were two New York guys who basically saved it. They worked a con on Broadway, you know. They used to do the egg cups with the coin underneath it, you know, and the money they got from that, they used to spend doing this radio show at 3 o'clock in the morning, which was all designed to get girls. But I never heard anything like it. I never heard scratching records. And just the idea that people in New York were into Depeche Mode was like, it was mind-blowing to me at the time anyway. And then he played me this South African township music, and he said, I want to make a record of all of this stuff. And so I was kind of, great, let's go. And I think the first thing we did was we went to South Africa. And we were there 2 years before Paul Simon, because Paul Simon really mined the same musical scene with Graceland. But he was like 2 or 3 years behind us. We were there first, and we didn't take any psychiatrists with us. And I know he had 2 psychiatrists with him when he went. But so we went to South Africa, and South Africa was like a weird place.
I mean, obviously, that was during apartheid.
Yes,
like
big time apartheid. And Malcolm had been there before me, and he collected all of these musicians who were musicians that the record labels there didn't like. Malcolm had found them because they probably had a bit of spirit, who knows. So I walked into a studio, and there's like 15 Zulus and Xhosas sitting, and it's like, hi, and I was the big producer from England. Malcolm would tell them, you got to do everything he says. And we were in the studio, we could only work at nights, and we were in there for like 16 nights in a row, and we had the most fun time. They couldn't go out at night because if you were black, you weren't allowed to be in Johannesburg at night. You had to be bussed out back to Soweto. I actually went to Soweto with Malcolm, and we did one of the best songs on that record to me was "Living in the Road in Soweto," which, if you'd have seen Soweto in 1982, it was like the dark satanic mills. There was no electricity. There was a great big pall of coal smoke above it.
They already had that massive Kraftwerk thing right in the middle of Soweto, right? There's like a big coal Kraftwerk kind of thing.
It was. I just remember seeing it in the distance and seeing the coal smoke above it, and of course things were different because, when we were starting, I was sitting behind the desk or whatever, and everyone was sitting at the back, and this tall white guy came in and he said, "Is everything all right? Do you like the studio?" I said, "Well, the studio's not great, but it's all right. It'll be fine." He said, "Do you need anything?" I said, "Oh, I'd like a cup of coffee." And without thinking, I went, "Anybody else want a cup of coffee?" I kind of looked at me like that. I said, "Oh, no, nobody else wants a cup of coffee, no." So the guy went and got me a cup of coffee. They were, it was a funny play. It was a weird vibe. And after I'd been there for for a day or so, I asked them if they could, I said, "Jim, do you think you could get me some pot? What's it like getting pot around here?" They said, "Oh, we get you some pot." And so I gave them $20. And the next day, he came in with a carrier bag full of pot. I said, "My God, hide that, quick. That's too much. I'll go to prison for that. Would you like some? Here, have some." I was giving them some. And then I rolled the joint. And they were fascinated. "Trevor, what you doing? What you doing?" I said, "It's rolling a joint, yeah." Because they rolled it with newspaper, wet newspaper. So we all got to be really good friends. And Malcolm was kind of creating all the time and, trying things out. But he was, God bless him, he couldn't sing particularly. I mean, he really couldn't sing. And the first time, I remember the first time he ever sang for me was in South Africa. And we had, the song he was going to sing was Jive My Baby. I think it was on the album. And he won't mind me doing an impersonation of him. I mean, because I did love him. And so I'm sure he would, if wherever he is now, he's passed over. I mean, I'm sure he wouldn't mind. I said to him, Malcolm, today you've got to sing. I've got to hear you sing. And so he said, oh, it's no problem. I'll sing Jive My Baby. And it was probably about 11 o'clock at night. And all the musicians were sleeping at the back. And he went into the studio, and he was wearing his sort of cowboy hat. And I said, you have to put some headphones on. So he put the headphones on, and he was standing there. And I said, Malcolm. And he went, huh, what? I said, I'm in the headphones, me in the headphones. Oh, all right. I said, the music will play through the headphones, and you sing along with it. You're in after 8 bars. He said, 8 bars? What's a bar? What do you mean? And I said, 8 bars, 8 times 4 beats. Oh, no, it's too technical. He said, just you give me a cue. You go like that when it's time for me to sing. Right? So the track started up, and it was a track a bit like that. So boom, ba-doom, boom, 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 ba-doom, boom, boom, whatever. Boom, ba-doom, boom, ba-doom, boom, ba-doom, boom, boom. And I'm thinking to myself, I better give him the cue a bit early, right? Just so maybe he'll come in on time. So he's standing there looking at me, and I gave him the cue, and he went, Tina said you can just jive, you can jive, my baby. And of course, we kind of went, and everyone who was sleeping at the back woke up, because it was such an awful noise, and my old engineer Gary Langan has a tape of the session where I say, my God, he sounds like Jimmy Clitheroe, who was a English comedian. He said he sounds like Jimmy Clitheroe on acid. And this little Zulu woman who was quite a piece of work said to me, Trevor, Malcolm can't sing. And I said, don't get involved, it's my problem. And so after he'd sort of sung it, I went out and I said, Malcolm, you're not singing the tune, really. You know, you need to sing, the tune goes, Tina says you can dress her. She loves it. And he said, do you want me to sing it like that? And I said, well, not exactly like that, but that's the tune. He said, I can't sing it like that. He said, no. He said, if you're looking for me to sing this in time and in tune, it's not going to happen. Yeah, I'm a wacky kind of guy, and that's all you're going to get, so you better figure out what you're going to do with it. Which is what I did. But in the end, we made a whole record together, and we had a good time. And when we left, it was really sad, because we paid all the musicians. You know, we didn't pay them proper money, because we just didn't. But we gave them like £1,500 each, which was for them was incredible, because most of them lived in Soweto, and they had very little money. And I remember saying to the guitar player, what are you going to do when you get the big check? And he said, I'm buying a wife. And I said, buying a wife? How much is a wife? He said, oh, £600. I said, but you've got a girlfriend. But I want a wife. And we were staying in the only multiracial hotel in Johannesburg, because I got a call at about 1 a.m. They said, there's some guy here in reception, you better come down. He says he knows you. And it was the guitar player. And he had a crate of special brew that he was holding. And he had this terrified little woman who looked like she was about 18. And he was checking at the hotel. I always remember that. And he had the check. And I said, no, it's okay. He's got the money. He'll be fine. And that was his honeymoon night. So anyway, I could talk about Malcolm for hours. You probably would move me along.
But there was one moment in there when you said earlier, Malcolm told them, here's the Big Cheese record producer from England, and you better do what he does.
What he tells you.
Yeah, but how did that make you feel? I mean, you know, coming from like England, where it was at least a lot more multiracial like that, and then coming into this environment where obviously, you're clearly white and part of a system that's you're probably not really supporting.
Well, not at all. No. Do you know what? I didn't have a single problem. I was really into thumb slapping the bass at the time, and everybody in the band wanted to learn how to thumb slap. So I was having thumb slapping classes with them. We got on well. Musicians are musicians. It doesn't matter where you are. And I don't work in a way where I've never been somebody who's kind of, I mean, dictatorial, I'm sure, and I'm sure a megalomaniac and all of those kind of things, but I'd like to think I'm not unpleasant, you know? And so it was a really good atmosphere. I knew it was going to change. I mean, you can't keep something like that going. It was dreadful. And I think, you know, well, it all changed a few years, thank God to Nelson Mandela. But no, I didn't feel funny at all. I had a good time. You know, I enjoyed it. And it was after that we did Buffalo Girls, because if that's the next, if you're going to play that one. Oh, don't let me take it.
Yeah, you're listening to the.
It's difficult to know how crazy that record sounded back in 1982. People would, when they heard it, their sort of jaws would drop because it was so unlike anything anybody ever heard. And funny enough, I got a phone call on, it's Wednesday today, Friday last week. A guy called Richard Russell phoned me up. Richard Russell runs XL Records, you know, that have the white stripes, and he wanted to come around and see me, and he'd been with Damon Albarn from Blur and Gorillaz, and they'd been playing this track, and they'd been on the internet, and he said, "Do you know it was the first British rap record?" I said, "Yes, I did know." But so, you know, it's not something that many people are interested in. But that was a trip, because those two guys, we flew them over. It was one of those daft ideas. Malcolm wanted the single from Duck Rock to be Buffalo Girls. And Buffalo Girls, he played me the Peyote Pete recording of it from the 1948 Folkways album, which just basically goes, "Where's Buffalo Girl? Go around the outside, round the outside." It's an old hoedown, you know, country dancing sort of thing. And he wanted it to be the single, and I had a real problem with that. I couldn't see it. I didn't know what to do with it. And we tried recording it like the Peyote Pete version down in Tennessee. That was an experience in itself, because it just was. But we don't have hours. But
3-minute Cliff's Note version of that.
Pardon?
The 3 minutes Cliff Notes version of that, please.
How did that? Well, Malcolm said, "We're going to do Buffalo Girls. I've got a group called the Hilltoppers. They're going to come and play, and we're in this studio called it was called Tri-State Studios, and the Hilltoppers showed up, and they were in a purple VW van that had carpet on the inside of it, like purple carpet. And they played at a lot of folk conventions, you know. There was a very old hilltopper who had a hat on saying the oldest hilltopper, and he was about 92. And then there were a few children who looked like they might have had interesting parents, because they were boss-eyed and a bit strange looking. And and they started to play. We set up some mics around them. They started to play, and they were awful. And Malcolm came over to me and said, "This is awful. You're the producer. Get rid of them." So I had to go over and I said, "Guys, that was great. That'll do for what we need. Thanks very much. Here's $50, and they were happy, and off they went in their purple VW. And I said to the guy who owned the studio, I said, "Do you think you could get us any musicians?" And they, you know, it's southern states of America, they're very laid back. Yeah, should be able to. Utility pickers? I said, "Yeah, utility pickers, that's it, we need some of them." And so he said, give me some time and I'll get on the phone. So a bunch of guys showed up, and they all had that sort of slightly tough, hard-bitten sort of American kind of look, until they smiled. And they didn't know, you know, we set up, and they could obviously play really well. And they were a crazy bunch of guys. I remember going to the toilet at one point, and there's about 5 of them doing great big lines of blow off the sink, you know, in the toilet. And pretty quickly, I had to put Malcolm into a soundproof area and take him out of their headphones, because he had his buffalo hat on, and he'd just completely lose his place and throw everybody totally out of sync. You know. I mean, he really, you know, and they'd be looking at me going, what you gonna do with this? And I was, well, I'm gonna do something with it. It'll be all right, don't worry. Anyway, after we'd done that, Malcolm said, we got the single, that's great. And I'm thinking, got the single? No way. So it's one of those moments at dinner, he said, I want to do a scratching record now, scratching rapping record called E.T. Come Home, about E.T. And I said, why don't we do a rapping, scratching version of Buffalo Girls? And he said, yeah. Good, thank God, we might be in with a chance now. And he flew those two guys over from New York, the world's famous Supreme team, who showed up in England. They didn't know what was going on. They couldn't. They thought Malcolm was like some weird guy from God knows where. And they didn't even bring their decks with them. So we had to get onto the record label in New York. So there was like 3 days where we couldn't do anything while they went to a shop, bought the decks with the Stanton cartridges, and then they were flown over. Somebody from Charisma Records got on a plane and brought them over to England. And I didn't, it was one of those things where I didn't really know where to start with them, because I said, this thing you do with the records, scratching the records, it's amazing. I've got this thing here called a Fairlight, and it does the same thing with digital audio. Let me show you. The possibilities are endless. And they looked at the Fairlight. No, man, that's whack. And I was like, what does whack mean? Because I hadn't heard all of that kind of opposite sort of language at the time either. And I said to them, we're going to make this rapping record. So what you need to do is show me what your favorite beat is. So they kind of sung me their favorite beat, which was like, boodoo, jack, boom, boom, jack, dum, boodoo, jack, boom, boom. And I had an Oberheim rig where I had a DMX, a DSX, and a keyboard. And it took me hours, because they kept going, no, like this, to get the sort of swing element of it right. But, after about 4 hours, I had boodoo, boo, and I just threw in some bass thing that went bomb, 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 just to give it a bass. And they really liked it. They were, hey, this is good, man. This is happening. And I said, now we've got to wrap this over it. And then I showed them the lyrics to Buffalo Girls. And they went, nah, we can't do that. That's Ku Klux Klan shit. That's what the Ku Klux Klan dance to. I said, but we're going to modernize it. Nah, they said, no, we can't rap that. So I said, look, I'll show you. We can rap it. And I said, Gary, let me go. I'll go and do it. So I went into the studio and I rapped. First, Buffalo Girl, go round the outside. I kind of rapped it. And I was looked back in the control room. I couldn't see them. I thought, oh, God, they've gone. They're so pissed off with me, they've gone. So I stopped and I went in the control room. They were both on the floor, crying with laughter. They were laughing so hard. And they would put their arms up. Trevor, man, don't be a rapper. Man, you're shit. I said, is that shit good or shit bad? Bad.
But bad meaning good.
Is bad good? Anyway. It sort of broke the ice a bit with them, and they got much more friendly after that, because up to then they hadn't been sure. And actually, when Malcolm rapped Buffalo Girls, I had to stand next to him and punch him on the chest in time with the track. Because he'd just go, the track would play and he'd just go, first Buffalo Girl, go around the outside. Then, no, Malcolm. It's boom, 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 first Buffalo Girl, go round the outside. And he's, right, okay, I get it. And so standing there doing this, after about 4 takes, I started to get tired and I stopped doing it and off he went. And he said, you got to keep hitting me. Come on, what's your problem? I said, I'm exhausted, Malcolm. Come on. Buffalo Girls, that's how we got the vote. But the record itself, the track, took ages to do, because we kept trying to do something much more ambitious. And I had Ann Dudley, the keyboard player arranger. She was doing the music, and JJ, who was in the Art of Noise, was doing the Fairlight. And in the end, I had, we spent days days, probably 2 weeks, trying to get something out of Malcolm, the world's famous Supreme team, Ann Dudley and JJ, that would be that would be good. And there's some hilarious outtakes that I've got somewhere where you can hear the world's famous Supreme team saying to Malcolm, "Man, Malcolm, you're a vibe killer. You kill the vibe, man, like nobody." And in the end, I had to say to him, "Malcolm, do me a favor. Give me one day, just me and the guys, just one day, and I think I can crack this track." And we did it. Me and Anne Dudley and myself and Gary Langan of the world's famous Supreme team did it in a day. We recorded it in a day. Malcolm did the vocal. And I always remember when the world's famous Supreme team were leaving England to go back to New York, they phoned me up and they said, Trevor, we got to record that song again. I said, why? He said, because the scratching's whack. And I said, is that bad? I don't get you. You mean it's not right? It's whack. And I said, oh, don't worry about that. It's a punk record. It'll be fine. It's all right. And he said, oh, okay. Then can we have the drum machine? And I said, well, no. It cost me 2,000 quid. I can't just give you that. They said, okay, bye. They were gone, and I never heard from them again. Is that enough about that?
I mean, it's kind of amazing to see that all this effort went into something that really sounds like someone coming back from New York with like a tape recording on a cassette and just chucking that into whatever sort of device and cutting it up.
Yeah, but you couldn't chuck anything into anything. Back then, there was nothing to chuck it into.
But how about like, I mean, didn't you just say you had like a massive Fairlight? And like,
well, I had a Fairlight, but the Fairlight only had 8 seconds of sampling time.
come on, it's only a bit of work.
And you could only put in bits that were half a second long. So, yeah, it has a certain, there's a certain structure to it. But it was actually a hit. They played it on the radio and it was a hit. And just as a sort of postscript to it, I was always a little bit nervous because at the end of it, I had the girls saying too much of that Snow White at the end. And I thought, should I have left that on there? I could get in trouble for that because it's a reference to cocaine, obviously. One day, somebody came and said, the controller of the BBC is on the phone and wants to speak to you. And my heart started to go like this. I thought, Jesus, they've sussed out the fucking Snow White thing. And so I picked up the phone and he said, we're going to give you a special DJ's award. Like, God for that. So, it caused quite a stir. But one thing that I did do with it that was interesting was a lot of the stuff that I'd recorded in South Africa, because I was obviously aware of copyright even then, I cut onto vinyl. And so all that, oh, she's looking like a hobo, is the Zulu people from South Africa. And in fact, that little noise at the front, the Malaya, that the woman does at the start, that's the Zulu woman that said Malcolm couldn't sing. And that's the Zulu War Cry that Zulu women make when they're killing somebody. That's what she told me anyway.
Right on.
So, Buffalo Girls.
On that note, maybe you were mentioning it earlier, to a mildly happier note. Whoops, not so happy.
Turn it down a bit.
Yeah. Yippee-yi-yay, yippee-yi-yay.
Yeah, it's funny listening to that. There's one part where Martin goes, whoa, 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 or something at one point. And I remember now we made that up from a few bits of vocal because we didn't have sort of samplers then, and we needed something for that bit. And I remember editing a half-inch, flying them off onto a piece of half-inch tape, editing the half-inch tape, and then flying them back into the track. Flying that line, whoa, 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 or whatever it was, just to get that there. David Bowie came in while we were working on that. We were working in Tony Visconti's studio, and we were doing The End. Because if you listen to The End, that's I sing the "Be Lucky in Love." That's me singing at the end, and we were trying to figure out how to finish the song off. And I said, Mark, we need to do something at the end. You need to do something. Maybe you need to talk, or maybe you need to say something. And Tony Visconti came in and said, "Do you mind if David comes and sits at the back for a minute?" It's like, no, I was a huge David Bowie fan, so no problem at all. And it was the only time I ever saw Anne Dudley put some makeup on. she ran off to the loo and came back with makeup. And I said, well, you look different, Anne. Well, David Bowie's coming in. And he came in and he sat at the back for a while. And I remember being quite impressed by the fact that his eyes were two different colours. And we were talking about what to do with the end. And he said, why don't you have a message from an answering machine? Answering machines were relatively novel at that point. And we were like, I don't know about that. Don't know if that's such a good... No, Martin said, I'm going to say something. I'm going to write something. But then David Bowie went. And then he suddenly came back again. I remember he was like, has anybody seen my bag? And we were like, no, sorry, David, no. He went again, and then an assistant came in and said, has anybody seen David's bag? I think one of the guys from ABC came running in, and he was so pleased with me. He was saying, I freaked David Bowie out. I've hidden his bag. And they can't find it. He's looking everywhere for it. Can you imagine? I've freaked David Bowie out. He was so chuffed with himself. But they were brilliant, ABC, when I listened. I mean, the lyrics of that are really clever, you know? I mean, they were all bright guys, and they were listening to American records. And so, you know, most of that, they worked out themselves. That was the second single. And by that point, you know, we had a way of working that sort of... Because the first record I did with them was Poison Arrow. And when we first worked together, you know, we spent a day in the studio, and they played Poison Arrow, and they were okay. You know, the drummer was a guy called David Palmer, who plays with Rod Stewart now. So he was a career drummer. I thought he was a pretty good drummer, but nobody else was that good. And, you know, when they played it, when I'd recorded, I said to them, is this what you've got in mind? Is this what you want? And they said, why? And I said, well, do you want to work harder on it? Do you want it to sound better than this? They were like, how good can we get it to sound? I said, well, you can get it to sound better than this, but you'll have to go through a process. At the time, I was probably one of the first producers who had a rig, and my rig consisted of an 808 with a set of triggers on the side of it, and a mini Moog, and a sequencer that it was a Roland sequencer that you just put lists of notes into it. Everything worked from the 808 with, you know, I used to use the audio as triggers for the sequencer. And I also had a set of Dave Simmons synth drums that he'd made for me, and he'd modified my TR-808 so I could drive these synth drums. So I can, in essence, you know, the sequencer worked with CV and gate, you know, control voltage and gate, which is why I've never liked MIDI, because that used to be absolutely locked spot on. Anyway, I said, well, look, if you want to make it better, the first thing we have to do is I have to program everything that your drummers played into the 808. And then I'll program the bass player's part, put the two, you know, in the sequencer. And then we'll record that. And then we'll start again. You play the drums over the TR-808 and try and get everything as close as possible to, you know, so it's perfectly in time. As perfectly in time as you can. They were sort of bemused by it, but they were very ambitious. And of course, that's exactly what we did. And it was the you know, it must have taken me 8 or 10 hours, because I don't know if anybody's ever programmed an 808, especially if you have to put a song in it. It's very fiddly. And of course, we weren't singing it to tape, so you know, when it was all done, you just press the go button and off it went. And so they played on top of it, and the bass player played on top of it. And of course, we got a much tighter track. And that sort of opened their eyes a little bit. And so by the time we came to Look of Love, they had it all worked out, you know, and they wanted me to put the bass part into the sequencer, and we started it in exactly the same way. That's the only thing you could do back then. I mean, you couldn't really... It was early days of locking stuff to tape.
On the content level, I mean, you got like almost a 4-hour soul disco opera in this track, in the way the drama builds and the arrangement and all of that.
Yeah.
And then you always got these tiny little asides where this other voice is counteracting with like, what's that? And who's got the look and all that kind of stuff.
Look, yeah.
And who came up with that
Oh,
concept?
that was them. They were very bright guys, you know. It was a bit like you give them one thing and they'd run with it. They came up with they wrote the song. I think my main contribution was "Be Lucky in Love" at the end, and suggesting that he talk. I mean, aside from, you know, recording it and mixing it, and Dudley did the strings. That was the first time we did real strings on one of their records, and it was Ann Dudley's first ever string arrangement. It was the first time I'd used strings for you know, for a long time as well, because before I had a hit, I had a very bad experience with the string section, who literally walked out in the middle of a take as the minute hand went through 1 o'clock. They were in the middle of a take, they put down their instruments and walked out. And I was so upset because it cost money. I remember I threw the check on the floor in front of the fixer and put my foot on it and walked off. And I said, I'm never using real strings again. I'm never working with those kind of musicians ever. You know, but we all say those kind of things. And, you know, when it came to this, it was Anne's first arrangement, and it was a big thing for her. But she was good, you know. I was lucky on that record. I had a great keyboard player, great engineer. You know, the engineering on that still, you know, is really good. So, what was the question? I've forgotten. Was it their idea? It was their idea. The whole record was their idea. They wanted to make. They went to a club. When they were at university, they used to go to a club and dance, and they used to listen to American records, and they loved American records. They wanted to make their own version of an American soul record that had more content to it. And so really, I facilitated it.
Was Paul Morley involved in any way at that stage already?
No, Paul Morley was the journalist for the NME. No, what happened? Paul Morley, I became friendly. Paul Morley interviewed me when I was a Buggle, you know, and I was doing lots of interviews, and I was pretty inexperienced, and I thought that people who interviewed you were your friend, and I had a pretty rude awakening, and for a while I was saying if I ever see that Paul Morley again, I'm going to deck him, right? Tell him, and so I was pretty angry with him because he wrote some nasty thing about me, which was kind of true. So I didn't, you know, I mean, in
and
retrospect,
which was?
Dirty old men with modern mannerisms. That's what he called the Buggles. And we were dirty old men. I was 30. I wasn't 17, you know. I wasn't... and I did have modern mannerisms because I'd been listening to Kraftwerk. But then I produced this group called Dollar. Give a few tracks, Give Me Back My Heart, Mirror, Mirror, Handheld, and Black and White. They were all big hits in England. I don't think they did anything over here. But suddenly, the NME was writing nice things about me. I was kind of astonished because I didn't think the NME would like an act like Dollar because they were kind of a little pop act, kind of like a modern act in a way. Like they could, although compared to some modern acts, you mean they were like Pavarotti and whatever because there was no auto tune, so they really had to be able to sing then. And it was Dollar that got me ABC because ABC were very trendy. And Paul Morley loved ABC, and so he wrote even more nice things about me. And then, so the next time I met him, I didn't punch him. But I got him to come and start ZTT for me because I just had, you know, Island Records wanted me to start a record label.
Before we get to that episode in a second, there was another track in between that might be worth talking about. I mean, the crazy thing when you listen to this now, especially when you kind of grew up with that kind of stuff on pop radio, is the amount of things that apparently don't really connect from like a very obvious point. I mean, you got an incredibly manly guitar riff there, and then you got this kind of disco-ish beat, and a couple of like tape samples, I presume.
Well, no, that was by that point we had a synclavier, and there's a lot of synclavier.
Which was what probably?
This was which year was this? Oh, I know exactly. We started that album in late 1982 and finished it autumn of 1983. And we had this track for a long time, but it had a different song over it. And the song, as it originally was so awful that I was convinced, well, the verses of it were so awful that I was convinced that if we didn't put loads of whiz-bangs and gags all over the verse, no one would ever listen to it. I thought, because I always thought it was a hit chorus, you know. But when I first heard that song, the verse went, I mean, to give you some perspective, Trevor Rabin, who was a South African pop star, had joined Yes. He was a sort of brilliant guitar player and keyboard player. But he, as a songwriter, he tended to go towards American kind of rock stuff. Like, because when they wanted me to produce them, because, you know, I'd been in the band as a singer. I replaced John Anderson for 1 year in 1980, which was an incredible experience, never to be repeated. Because John Anderson sings so high, and I can sing high, but I can't sing as high as John Anderson, and not for as long. So I knew the band really well, and in 1983, I'd just done Malcolm McLaren. I was really hot as a producer, and my wife was furious with me for wanting to do Yes. You know, it's like, Yes are finished, they're old farts, you know. And who's interested in Yes? But I always loved the bass player. You know, I was a bass player, and Chris Squire to me is the only bass player who ever got away with playing melodic parts on loads of songs. You know, I don't think anyone's even come close to him. And so I wanted to do it. You know, I just wanted to do it, but I wasn't sure about the songs. And I went to Trevor Rabin's to hear the songs for the album. And he played me 3 or 4, and they were all the same kind. I remember one of them, moving in, boom, boom, I'm moving my love into you, that kind of love kind of thing. And I've always been a bit allergic to love. It's never been my thing, you know. And I was getting a bit, God, this is going to be a bit of a drag. What am I going to do about this? What are Yes going to sound like playing that? And Trevor Rabin went to the loo, and he left a tape machine going. And this song came on, and the demo of it had that intro where it had a very powerful intro that did that sort of snap jump cut straight to boom, 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 with the drums right up in your face. I think his intro didn't have drums on it; just had guitar. And I thought, wow, that's a good gag. I like that gag. And I like the riff, good tempo. Oh, it's a good riff. And then the song came in. The song was, you don't want to go dancing. You won't even answer the phone. You're so scared of romancing. Everything you do is alone. You know, it was that kind of thing. Try it's hard to please you. Give you all the loving I know. I hated the verse. Then he went, owner of a lonely heart. I thought, that's good with dee-dee-dee-dee. And I said to him, as he came out the toilet, I said, this is a hit song. That's a hit chorus. He said, oh, no, this song's not for Yes. I wrote it for somebody else. I said, no, Yes could do this song. It's a hit song. No, I don't know about that. Anyway, 90125, we recorded all of the tracks apart from this one, and they didn't want to do it. And I had to beg them. And, you know, when you've been a singer in a band, you can kind of be funny with them, you know. And I was literally in the townhouse. I was crawling around on the ground, pulling at people's trousers, saying, please, please, have a go at this song. We need a single. You know, I'm a hot producer at the moment. If I don't get a single, I'll be fucked, you know, please. And Chris was like, all right, and we'll give it a go. And we spent days with them trying to play it. And the intro was fine, but once the thing started, they kept wanting to change the riff, you know, dang dang gang gang dang dang boom 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 chung. It's like, can't we just play it straight and simple? Boom. Anyway, we got to program it. We've got to program it, and they were very against it because they'd never programmed anything in their whole careers, and the drummer was really anti it. But I prevailed, and myself and Chris Squire programmed the drum machine, you know, for the initial track. And Trevor Rabin's big friend was a guy called Mutt Lange. And now, if you don't know Mutt Lange is probably the biggest record producer that's ever been. He's the guy that produced Def Leppard, Shania Twain, you know, the Cars, the Boomtown Rats, AC/DC, and he's a kind of the very well, you know, he's a rock producer, and he is what you would imagine. What I think is what some people have imagined that I'm like. He's like draconian, right? He'll have a fist fight with the band if he can't get his own way. He's a tough guy. And Trevor had this idea that the drums on this should be big, like an American, you know, doof, like a big snare drum. And he kept trying to interfere in the engineering side of it and kept trying to make the drums sound like that and driving me and Gary nuts. Right, Trevor, I hope you don't watch this. And so when we came to do the drums, I said to Gary, all this shit with the snare drum tuned down is crap. It sounds dreadful. And it doesn't suit Alan. And I'd just been listening to Synchronicity. So Stuart Copeland, that's the sound. Let's tune Alan's snare drum. What key are we in? A. Tune it up to a high A. So we tuned his snare drum to a high A. And so that sound. And I loved it, you know. But I remember, you know, I was working in Sam East, and it was a tiny control room. And in order to get to the toilet, you had to walk through the reception. And as I was walking through the reception, the whole Yes crew was there. And I heard the chief roadie saying, "Fucking drums sound like a fucking pea on a barrel. I don't know what Trevor was up to." And then he saw me and said, "Oh, sorry, Trev." I said, "Fuck off, Nunu." They're staying like that. And even up till, you know, Ahmed Erdogan, the guy that ran Atlantic, heard the backing track because all of those little doodles, you know, bam, were originally on the demo, but they were played on a mini Moog. And I had the Fairlight, and I had that Malcolm McLaren tape, and I took that in and said, can't we use some of this instead of playing those things on a mini Moog? Let's play them on Crazy Sounds. And it worked really well. I mean, it worked incredibly. But and it took me, I think, from January of 1983 till probably July to persuade Trevor to rewrite the song. And in the end, he and I stayed up all night. We rewrote it about 4 or 5 times, and then at about 3 o'clock in the morning, I turned into John Anderson for a minute and said, "I'm John Anderson, and I'm not singing that. I want to sing something different." And I started to sing, "Move Yourself," you know, that bit, for which I got 15% of the song. I wrote the verses. John Anderson didn't like it at all. Yeah, I mean, I said to him, "Don't you, you know, it's an improvement on the other tune." And he said, "Well, it's not exactly Sending the Clowns anyway." He was a bit rude about it. And he said that he wouldn't sing my lyrics on the second verse because he didn't like them. So he rewrote it and did the eagle in the sky, White Eagle in the Sky. And so me and Gary decided we'd shoot the eagle. So if you listen, there's a gun blast on the record. And it's us shooting the eagle, White Eagle in the Sky. But Ahmed Ertegun loved the song. Trevor Rabin kept trying to remix it with a big snare drum going doof, and Ahmed Ertegun stopped it and made them put out our mix of it.
Would this be a good example to tell folks about negotiation techniques in getting points on a record?
Negotiating points on a record? Well, points on a record, my manager would have sorted out beforehand. But writing, yeah. Yes, we're always very fair with the writing thing, and I've always tried to be really fair with writing. I mean, I did 4 Seal albums, and you wouldn't see my name credited on any of the songs as a writer, even though I contributed a lot to some of the songs, mainly arrangement. If I actually write something, like I wrote the verse tune and the lyrics for that, I would want something for that. But if you're working with decent people, it shouldn't be a problem. I'm just always straight up about it. What can be awful sometimes, and I felt it once or twice in my life, is where somebody doesn't want you to write something because they don't want you to have any of the publishing. And a couple of times when I found myself in that position, I've generally left because I don't want to be caught like that. I don't want to feel uncomfortable. And the thing is, you know, I tear people's songs apart and rebuild them, and people are fine with it, just as long as you don't try and get some of it, some of the writing. But if you do write some of it, you really do write some of it, not just suggest something or come up with a word I came up with 2 words for a Robbie Williams track last year, and I said, you can have the words. Just 2 words and 1 bit of it, you know. It's better to be upfront about those kind of things. If artists think that I remember Dave Gilmour telling me about, you know, the guitar player in Pink Floyd, telling me about how edgy he got with his producer because he kept thinking he was trying to get some publishing, you know, and he would be pushing it away all the time. So negotiating techniques for points.
How would it work? Would your manager negotiate a certain rate before you go into the record and go like, okay, I get a set fee, or I get like 5 points on this, or?
Oh yeah. Back then, I would probably have got 4 points on that Yes record, because that was my going rate, and I was always much more interested in the points than in the advance. The film, if you're in the film business, always make sure you get a big advance, because there's not much on the back end of it. But in records, there used to be a lot on the back end, you know. But I wouldn't necessarily negotiate that. My wife used to negotiate it. But to give you an idea of how that would go sometimes, in about probably 1986, 87, I got a call from Sting. And he invited me over to his house up in Highgate. I went to see him for lunch, and he said, we want to do a greatest hits album, and we want to renegotiate all our greatest hits. We want to re-record them. And the only person that we can agree on is you to do it. I was like, oh, I'm really flattered. I said, but do you really want to re-record Roxanne? I mean, my favorite Police song was Don't Stand So Close to Me. You know, and I thought Nigel Gray's production on it was brilliant. I thought Nigel Gray was one of the unsung hero producers, because I never heard anybody get a better sound than Nigel Gray, better guitar sound. Anyway, Sting said, no, we definitely want to re-record them because I can sing so much better now. So, right, okay. Well, I mean, it's a bit of a big one to turn down. I said, okay. He said, have you got a good manager? Because mine's an animal. I remember he used those exact words. And I said, well, I'm married to my manager. She can be an animal sometimes. But don't worry about me. I'll be fine. Sting's manager at the time was Miles Copeland. The negotiation between my wife and Miles Copeland lasted for, I think it was 32 seconds. It went like this. Hi. Right. Miles Copeland said, we never pay royalties. My wife said, we never work without getting royalties. He said, well, we never pay them. So Jill said, okay, then give me £1 million for it. He said, no. That was it, clonk, gone. He ended it. But I mean, I said to her, look, I really don't want to do this. I don't want to do it because I think it's one of those kind of stupid ideas that will end up nowhere. Because once they start playing it, they'll realize, so what, play it again. Who cares? Who wants to hear a re-recording of Roxanne? I don't, you know? So that's negotiating points.
Using that song as another example, when you listen to it, it's almost like you have a DJ, like an old school hip hop DJ, playing 2 tracks at once. And once the riff has come in, it's like over to the rhythm track. Like, how would you have to picture this in the studio at the time? Like, how many people would be operating the board and stuff?
Yeah, well, there was a 40-channel SSL, and what we did when we were doing those kind of, I used to call those whiz bangs, the whiz bangs, you know, that would go across it. We had a very crude backing. We had a very simple backing track, and for instance, we did the guitars at the front. We would do those guitars, the heavy guitars, and then we would cut the tape, cut the 2-inch, leader it up both sides, and erase so that the guitar, so that everything stopped dead on the downbeat. You know, if you put up the multi-track for that song, you'll find it's pretty like the record, because I learned very early on that leaving things till the mix was a really bad thing. Because in the mix, you never know where your head's going to be at. You're worn out with the track. It's much better to have every effect, particularly, this is pre-computer. Although I think we had the computer by the time we mixed that one. But I still never lost the habit to have every effect already recorded, you know. And so if you put the multi-track up, you get that record. You wouldn't have to do anything with it. You know, just have to balance it up. So, you know, I mean, I could talk all afternoon about what you had to do when you were recording analog. It was a completely different thing, because with analog it was noise. You know, I mean, nowadays you can do a vocal, and if you're not a very good engineer, you can record the vocal. So it's like when you see it in Pro Tools, it's like this, you know, like a line like this, and then because it's not recorded properly, you can jack it up 20 dBs. If you jacked up something that you'd done on tape 20 dBs, it would sound dreadful. The hiss would be as loud as the vocal. So you were constantly, everything that went to, that's why, in a way, the engineer was so important. Gary Langan, who engineered that, was a brilliant engineer. His hand would never be off the fader. Somebody was singing, he'd have the lyric sheet. Where they were singing quietly, he'd be cranking it up, pulling it back, pushing it, all the time, everything. And everything that you recorded was like that. There was all sorts of tricks that you did. If you wanted to fly something in, you had to put it on a piece of 1/2-inch tape and put chalk marks and press start, you know. And it would take you 5 or 10 minutes, and eventually you would start it at the right point, and you'd fly things in like that. There was all kinds of stuff that we did. Does that help at all?
I guess it will be a little bit more haptical if we head over to the studio a little later, but maybe to move on in the
You haven't got an
timeline.
analog machine, have you?
The things we can find in time. Something else that might be worth playing.
Relax came about really because somebody brought out a box called a conductor, and I had one of the first ones, and you could lock page R on a Fairlight. Page R was a sequencer page that had 8 tracks. You could lock page R to a Linn drum machine, and that was, at the time, that was pretty big stuff, because there was no way really that you could sequence samples other than a Fairlight on this 8-channel sequencer. And I was having a problem, you know. I mean, I've talked about this record. People ask me about it a lot, because this was the 4th version of this song. Because the band, when we signed the band, their guitar, they never told me, like bands never tell you shit, right? They never told me that the guitar player that they had in the band couldn't play. That the guy that had played on the demos had left to go into plumbing. That was a wise choice. And so the band couldn't play, and it was like one of those things. You said it, you know, it always makes me laugh when I hear people go, just simply recording, I just set the microphones up and they played it, and there it was, and I didn't interfere with it. God knows what would have happened if I'd have done that with this. It sounded terrible when they played it. They couldn't play it in time. The bass player and the drummer were good, and the singer was brilliant, and the track was great, but it was an unusual track. It didn't really have a sort of, it was like a jingle, and it was obviously about sex, and it was also at the time where you know, I don't know, it was a big gay thing on the go, because it had been legalized. You could be gay legally. I think before that you couldn't be. So there was a whole new kind of feeling in the air, and the Frankies, 3 of them were straight and 2 of them were gay, but they all got on really well, and they were funny. They were all from Liverpool. They were kind of like, I imagine the Beatles must have seemed. They were funny and charming, and I thought Holly's voice in the track was really good, you know. But I just didn't know how to make the record out of it, and we tried. I tried with the band. I tried with the Ian Jury's band, the Blockheads. I tried getting them to play it, and the bass player in the Blockheads, Norman Watt-Roy, who play, you know, the bass part for "Hit Me With Your Rhythm Stick," I think is one of the all-time great bass parts. Came up with "Bam Bam Bam," and I remember thinking, I'll keep that. That's a good idea. And I was messing around. I was messing around with a Linn 2. I had a Linn 2, and I had some pet patterns, and that sort of hoedown pattern, dig 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 dig. It was a pattern that I had, and it was just one Tuesday afternoon. I sort of went over the limit a little bit, got a bit crazy due to something that somebody gave me, and I suddenly saw the light. I realized that we'd been wasting our time and we had to start again. And I tried to get the guys to wipe the tape. Even I said, "We've got to wipe it. I never want to hear this version again." Anyway, I threw a bit of a wobbler and I got under the desk and I was being silly and saying, "I've been defeated. I can't do this track," all that kind of stuff. And then said, "Let's have one more go." And it was a great day. It was like one of those days where when you're boating, the wind's behind you. And the first idea was, why don't we put an E minor chord behind it and see what it sounds like with an E minor chord? Because before that it had been sort of in R&B key, which is like E whatever. Putting it in a minor key suddenly gave it a sense of drama and made it sound more European in a good way, a way that I particularly liked. And we started to work on this arrangement, and my engineer at the time, who I didn't know very well, started playing guitar, a guy called Steve Lipson, who's a big producer now. He was playing guitar, and that guy called Andy Richards on the keyboards. And I'd had this one thing, that I had this 8 piano, ding, 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 with a 4 on the floor drum machine. And I knew there was something in that. And the way that this conductor thing worked, the sequencer, the Fairlight sequencer, went round all the time playing exactly the same thing, which was 8s on a piano and 4s on a bass playing 4 E's about, boom, 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 boom. But I could change the pattern on the lin, on the fly. And the effect of going from the 4 on the floor, I think we've got it on here, Tim, because I brought the multi-track of it. The effect of changing from one beat to another was like obviously really good. When you get to them, that's great. That works. So 4 or 5 of us in the control room, nobody from Frankie, unfortunately, spent the next sort of 4 or 5 hours working up this quite complex arrangement of the tune, which, I would be singing the song and changing the patterns on the drum machine and boogieing around. And Steve was playing, Andy Richards was playing keyboards, and JJ was doing silly things on the Fairlight, all the funny noises. And we worked up, we worked up the arrangement, and at about sort of 9 o'clock at night, we recorded it. And, because it wasn't the era of locking anything to tape, we couldn't sort of put something down and then lock the sequencer to it. You set the sequencer going, and I changed the lin on the fly. You just had to give it, it would, you punch the numbers in, it would play in 2-bar loops. And we did it first take, and it is the first take. And the second thing we did after we recorded the backing track for the single, we did a 14-minute version of it that we called the Sex Mix. But here it is. If you just listen to the way that, where will it play from, Tim? That change in itself was very exciting. It never occurred. Funny enough, it never occurred to me that it was a dance record. And that sounds absurd now, but I wasn't thinking about a dance record. I was thinking about at the front, where it started. I imagined that armies of people stretching out to the horizon, waiting to have sex. And Holly being the sort of standing like on the top of a tower, and a minaret, like a minaret with minarets, calling the faithful to come and fuck, basically.
Well, it's basically the reaction that the Thatcher government had towards the track as well, right?
Yes. People got very angry about it. But I thought all of this was in my head, right? And that we would be okay. Anyway, I remember the singers arrived because the band were up in Liverpool, and Holly and Paul, who were the 2 singers, arrived at the studio at about 11 o'clock that night. And I told the reception, when Holly gets here, to keep them down there. Don't let them come up to the studio. And anyway, they phoned me at 11 o'clock. I said, Holly and Paul are here. So I went downstairs, and they, of course, they said, how's it going? And I said, well, it's changed a bit. And they said, changed? How much has it changed? I said, well, it's changed quite a lot, actually. He said, oh, no, you haven't started again, have you? Because you can remember this is the 4th time. I said, yeah, I've started again, sorry. And they ran, and I ran after them. They ran up to the studio. And, of course, we played it. And from the minute it started, they started to dance, and they loved it. And Holly loved it. He couldn't wait to sing it. And I told him the idea about the minaret and him on the tower. So he got my saxophone, and there's a note at the start. I don't know if it's there. Is it there on the multi-track? And he played the note on the top of the on the roof of the studio, and one of the guys recorded it onto a cassette player or something. And is that it? Just not that, no. It's at the same time as that. Is that it there? Actually, it might not be at the front. It's actually at the front, just before. There! That's Holly on the roof of the building, calling the faithful. Of course, and then, when I can't help myself, I got carried away with it a bit. And, I started saying things like, I want to have a huge orgasm here, And that was the big orgasm in the middle. He goes, come, whoosh, and all that stuff. And we just tried to we kept trying to get the orgasm bigger and bigger. And I remember going home that day, that night at about sort of 5 o'clock in the morning, and my wife, one of my children had just been born because it was a long time ago, and I said to her, I think we've cracked that track now. I think we've got it. And I said, thank God for that. And literally, we finished it within a couple of days. The interesting thing was, when it was first released, it got really bad reviews from a couple of the music papers. They said really horrible things about here, another disco record, another crappy disco record. And I was a bit, it sort of was out for about 4 weeks and didn't do anything. And then I was in America working with Foreigner. Because, not many people know it, but I did most of the backing tracks for Foreigner 5, their 5th album. I Want to Know What Love Is and all those things. But then I couldn't go on because we didn't get on. So I walked out. But I was there working with them when the first video for this arrived. And you can imagine these are all old rock and roll guys. And I tried to sort of play it down.
Could you describe the video maybe a little bit?
It was the pissing video, where they're all pissing on each other and stuff. And they were all saying, what's that? What's that video you got? And I was going, oh, no, nothing. And they were going, come on, let's see it. I said, okay. Played it, and they were like, that's disgusting. It's a fucking awful track as well. And I could see them looking at me thinking, God, is this our producer? But, and I remember the leader of Foreigner saying to me, I don't know how good that is, relax. And I was pretty down on it. I didn't think it, I thought, well, there you go. I worked hard on it, but, obviously it's not going to do anything particularly. Chris Blackwell took me out I was in New York. Chris Blackwell took me out to a place called Paradise Garage, which really, as they say, blew my mind because it was a dance club, but it had a rock and roll PA. And it was the first time I ever saw people bombing the bass, and doing crazy stuff with records. And I was so impressed with the sound there. And when we came out, I remember it was a Thursday night. I said to Chris, I want to do another mix of Relax. Now that I've been there, I know exactly how to do it. You can get me in a studio, and he got me in the Hit Factory. And I did that 12-inch that you were playing there. I did it on a Saturday. Because Andy Richards was over in New York. And I got him to play, all those keyboards at the start. He played those live as we printed it. I did it in half-inch edits. And the engineer that was engineering it was a rock and roll engineer. And he hated the track. I could tell he hated the track. He hated the whole thing. And, I keep doing a bit and go, yeah, done, okay, edit that on. Now we're going to do this. Now we're going to do a double, triple drop where we drop it some, then we drop it some, and then we completely drop it, and then we drop it even more. And he went to the toilet, and the assistant, who was like a 17-year-old kid, as soon as he went out of the room, said, "This is great. It's great. Don't listen to him. I love it. It's great," you know. And that sort of kept me going because I was getting a bit miserable. I mean, there was a lot of misery about Relax. And then, you know, what changed it was the band went on top of the pops, and from the second the band stood up and mimed to that track, it went mad. It went absolutely mad, and we just sold millions of records. We had a year where it was just unbelievable. And, you know, I kept trying to get the records right. I kept trying to get the 12 inches right, and so consequently there would be 2 or 3 different versions of the 12-inch, and people were buying all the versions. It was really the start of that whole 12-inch thing being big in the 80s, because the record label suddenly saw you could make a load of money from it.
Okay, because I mean, there's other sides of that story where people are just going like, oh, well, they just remixed it and remixed it and remixed it to make sure it went to #1, and like, and then up until the point till the British recording industry authorities only allowed like 2 or 3 remixes of a record.
Yeah, they stopped it. They stopped me. Yeah. I mean, the last, in the end, I refused to do another mix of it. I was so sick of it. But I was enjoying doing 12 inches for a while, you know. When we were doing 2 Tribes, whilst that was still #1, and I was terrified with 2 Tribes. It took me a long time with 2 Tribes to be confident enough to let it go. And the first 12-inch of 2 Tribes, the one that has all that stuff about if your grandmother or anybody else should die whilst in the shelter.
Which is a pretty grim theme. I mean, it's
but I still think,
yeah,
it's a great 12-inch. I think it's one of the best ones we ever did. Because I used to approach the 12 inches like it was a Yes track.
Yeah.
You know, like it was an arrangement of something that was, instead of being 3 minutes long, it was 8 minutes long. But it always had an arrangement, you know. It would build to a climax and break down. But it was a fun time for 12 inches. 12 inches were fun then for a while. But then I after a couple of years, I just got so sick of it.
Let's just quickly see whether that was the right version we got there now that we're talking about it.
This was a New York mix.
No.
Listening to that, you know, it just reminds me of how much trouble I used to get. People got very angry about some of that. I just got angry about it. I don't know why.
In what respects?
Just angry. I mean, everyone knows Relax was banned because of Paul Morley. Paul Morley did some funny things, you know. I mean, there's some talking on that, and I think it's on that and another track called War. And I said to Paul, some of that sort of speech that we got the actor to do is a bit weird. Where's it from? And he said, Mein Kampf. Oh, I don't know about that. I wish you'd told me. But the whole thing was kind of, it was a bit like that, you know, the guy that did all the talking. We discovered pretty early on that there was a tape that all local radio stations had. It was actually a disc. And every radio station had this disc. And if there was a nuclear air raid, they had to play it. It was a disc that they would get a call from the government, and everyone would have to play this disc. And this guy, Patrick, whatever his name was, had done the voiceover, and it was, you know, it was all about when the air attack warning sounds, go to the shelter, the whole bit. And we got this bootleg copy from CND, you know, the anti-atomic weapon people. They'd given us a copy of it. You weren't meant to have it. It was meant to be on. It was on the secret list. Rather than just use the track, I didn't want to get into trouble. I wanted to pay the guy who'd done the original voice. So we hired him. You know, he was a voiceover guy. And when he came in and I gave him the script that he had to do, it was £1,000. He was a well-known person. When I gave him the script, he looked at it and he said, "Oh, where did you get this from? You're not meant to know about this." And I said, "Well, we got it from C&D. And he said, "I don't know if I can do it. If I do this, I could be in trouble." And he said, "Oh, what the hell, I'm going to do it anyway." So he did it. He said we'd written it all out for him to say, and he said it. And at the end of it, he said, "You know, there's one bit you haven't got, you missed." And then he said, "What was it?" It was, if your grandmother or anyone else should die whilst in the shelter, put the body outside. And then he came, now was it, if your grandmother, he said about 4 or 5 times, I thought, God, that's dynamite. I love that. And I had it on a reel-to-reel, a piece of 1/4-inch tape. And while we were doing the 12-inch, because we used to get pretty carried away doing the 12 inches, it's the only way we could do them. We'd sort of have them blasting out loud. We'd be jumping around. We even had a smoke machine at one point for a while. To get you in the mood, you need to be in the mood. Otherwise, it's a bit of a cold process. Studios are pretty dreadful places when there's no vibe in them. So he had the sort of big vibe on the go, and I had the 1/4-inch tape. And we got to one bit, and I just kept playing it and rewinding it and playing that bit over and over again because I thought it's so macabre, But we never got into trouble. Nobody said anything. I was kind of disappointed. I thought we might get arrested or something. We've been banned for Relax. The guy banned it very publicly on the radio, and he banned it when it was number 2. And of course, we were all very upset because we thought it was going to destroy any chance it would have of getting to number 1. But I mean, it was from the moment it was banned, the sales went through the roof. So we never looked back.
I mean, it was a relatively popular thing at the time with pop bands, but bizarrely, there was a lot of cerebral pop out, I guess. Yeah. I mean, if you summed this up, it would be like amyl nitrate infested gay sex meets nuclear holocaust paranoia.
That kind of thing, yeah.
Yeah.
And,
a bit like the graphics were borrowing from like futurism, fascism, basically everything at the same time, and just turning it into like, how can we get it as controversial as possible?
That was Paul Morley was pretty into that. I remember I only took amyl nitrate once, and it's one of the few times in my life where I've danced. We poppers they were called, weren't they? And we were boogieing on the sofa, boogieing everywhere. And then, then this awful smell. What's that smell? And I realized, God, I stink. I never took it again after that. So we weren't, but when I listen back to it, it sounds a bit like that, doesn't it?
Maybe that's our segue for a last Frankie track.
Right.
On the amyl nitrate. Oops. Maybe we switch to a different mode now and have it running low and talk over it, because it takes, again, a while to build up.
It's a long thing. We're not even out the 80s yet.
No, not even, no. And I mean, this is still like an absolute staple in every spinning course gym around the world. Like, I mean, spinning.
Really?
Yeah, spinning fitness coaches just love this tune because, yeah, they just put it on a tape for 3 times and they get like all the different heart rates in like one workout. Do you still get royalties out of that?
Yeah, I'm sure I do.
Good one, yeah.
I'll check.
Right.
Well, this one came about because it was meant to be the title track of the album, Welcome to the Pleasure Dome. But it was actually only a 2.5-minute song. And we had by this point, we were recording on Sony Digital. We had one of the first Sony 24-track digitals. And I found out very quickly, if you have one Sony 24-track digital, you have to have 2 because they malfunction. So I had 2 of them. And I was working with a brilliant guy called Steve Lipson. And I came in the studio one day and he said, listen to this. And he played me a piece of this. What he'd done was he'd offset the 2 machines. So the verse was playing on one machine and the chorus was playing on another machine, and they were playing together at the same time, which is fair enough. I mean, the chords aren't really complicated on this. And I was knocked out, what are you doing? How are you doing that? And he said, I put an offset in, so I can offset one machine against the other. And so he said, that means we can make this longer if we want. I was like, well, what are we waiting for? Let's get going. And it just started. It took us 3 months, nearly. I know that because I had to stand up in court and testify. They said, you took 3 months to make this song. and they were trying to infer that I was just doing it for the studio money, or something like that. So I know exactly how long it took.
Who took you to court for that?
Holly Johnson. He wanted to get out of his contract. I lost the case, but I kept the record, which was really the most important thing. But once you realized that you could do that additive editing, you offset the two machines, so you've got a verse and a chorus, and you have a machine with another verse on it, and you just drop into record at this moment, and you print another verse, and then you drop into record and print another chorus with a machine, adding stuff, and it went on for ages. I mean, the front is the two girls from Propaganda in the bath upstairs at Psalm, because I wanted to kind of give it an atmosphere of sort of Dionysian kind of atmosphere with fauns and women in baths and stuff like that.
Maybe to save a bit of time here, while we're listening to this, what did you have to do with Propaganda in the first place?
Well, we signed Propaganda. Propaganda were a German band, and they had we signed them, and we had a bit of a hit with Dr. Mabusa, and we all really liked Claudia and Suzanne, the two singers. And I asked them if they'd mind getting in the bath. They said they'd get in the bath, but we couldn't go up. So we set the mics up, and then they locked the door and got in the bath. And there's some funny outtakes. I think, in fact, on the Frankie album, you can hear Ped shouting, "Claudia, Claudia, blow me, Claudia." Or some rude comment to her. Because the Frankies were they were from Liverpool, and they could be pretty vulgar, very funny. So so that's how we started this, and then it sort of went on and on and on, and we kept thinking of more bits, and then when we got to like 7 minutes into it, we decided to take it off into a time tunnel, like the bit. I was trying to imagine the sort of record equivalent of the end of 2001, the Space Odyssey. The Space Odyssey. Remember that, where he goes through the Stargate, and it's all coming at him like this. We decided to try and do a whole section that was like that, which is the whole middle part. I mean, he hasn't even come in singing yet, has he?
No.
So.
And I mean, even the album version was incredibly long as well.
Yeah, 16 minutes long, I think. 16, 17 minutes long. Yeah, but it's good. It doesn't get boring either. There's some great guitar solos in it.
And I mean, it was also around the time when the CD got really popular, and all of a sudden there was like a lot of high end, and like people were like getting really anal about it, like, oh, just listen about this great recording.
Yeah.
And sometimes at that time you're accused of torturing the world with top end.
Yeah, well, I picked that up in New York because that's the way the New York mixers used to mix, with loads of top end. And I guess I was over there for a little while in the 70s because a very nice guy called Eddie Germano, who ran the Fit Factory in New York, bought a record that I made. This is before I did a hit. And flew me over to New York because he wanted to meet me. And he was like, "There's something about this record that you've made. I'm not like anything I've ever heard before, and I just wanted to talk to you and see what you were like." He was a funny guy, and I learned a lot from him. He mixed the record for me, and so I came away with this idea of a lot of top end. It was also a point where a lot of diehards, analog people like the rock people, hated this stuff because it was too brash and too coarse sounding for them. And I remember going to a seminar that Sony had for their new digital multitrack, and all the old engineers were there, and they were all kind of, "It sounds shit. It doesn't sound very good." They were kind of talking like that. I remember Steve Lipson standing up and said, "Who cares?" Right? And it getting quite heated. That's Steve Lipson playing the guitar, a beautiful guitar solo, one take. Lovely memories of doing this, hanging microphones out of the window, bless you, when they were sweeping up after the Notting Hill Carnival, and great stuff. But it took a long time.
Well, as you can tell, I guess we could go on for hours there, but there's another track that we can't leave the house without. Oops. Let's see. Oops, no.
Well, when I first played that to my wife in the car, she said, "That's really boring." And I said, "It's meant to be boring. Some people like boring stuff, so we've done something boring for people who like boring stuff. It's maybe for, to have sex to or something like that, so you can just leave it going in the background." It was long. It's 8 minutes long. It's one of those one of those things that when we did it, it was an idea of Paul Morley's Moments in Love, and Anne came up with this sort of the riff. But initially, when we recorded it, we used like drum samples or something, and I remember saying, "Why don't we try and use all the wrong sounds on this and see what it sounds like? Let's use an orchestral snare, a double bass, and just the wrong sounds." And it's sort of, it worked with all the wrong sounds for some reason. And there's a bit of an old John Lee Hooker record in the middle. Now. From now, or one of those kind of things.
Did you clear that?
Yeah. Post we cleared it. But at the time we didn't clear it because at the time I just went and, I just went to a folk record shop and said, "Have you got anything with a guy playing the guitar?" And the poor person whose shop it was, "What kind of thing do you like?" And I was saying, "Blues." "Oh, we got some great blues." And all I wanted was a noise, I just wanted a bit of noise. But he was so into all of the records, He would have been horrified if he knew what I was going to do with it.
Now, Out of Noise, I mean, this track and Beatbox were absolute staples in a lot of different dance communities around the world, like Chicago, New York, Detroit, especially.
There was one afternoon when I was working on Foreigner, and back in, what is it, 83, and Foreigner were the kind of band where when I worked with them, I put on my best trousers and I polished my shoes and stayed pretty straight because they weren't much into being playful. So I was looking very straight, and I was walking through Greenwich Village, and there were two break dancers, and they had a boombox on the pavement, and they were break dancing to "She's a Hobo Scratch," which was one of the Malcolm McLaren tracks. And I remember standing there in front of them and thinking, God, if I told them that I made that record, they wouldn't believe it. I looked so straight,
Well, when you were more on the straight side of being like the record producer, mogul kind of guy.
My wife was the mogul. I was never the mogul.
I'm staying out of other
Right.
people's. But there's an account that you actually had a conversation with a young Derek May about doing some production work for you and being signed as part of a project which would include him, Juan, and Kevin Saunderson.
When would that be?
A little later, like when apparently you called him in to work for Seal.
That was it. It was the opening track on Seal's first album. It was a song called "The Beginning," and what was the guy's name? I don't.
Derek May.
Derek May. Sorry, I'm old. I've been doing this for a long time. Yeah, Seal had this thing for this track. He kept talking about Detroit techno, and I was like, "What's Detroit techno?" And he played me a couple of Detroit techno records. He said, "Can't we do it like this?" And we had a Space Invaders machine, and he kept on about this guy called Derek May. I think it was Derek May. And I was walking past the Space Invaders machine, and this American dude with a sort of cap, a whole R&B look on him, was playing the Space Invaders machine. And I said to him, if you do this, you'll get a bigger score, or whatever. And he said, "Oh, yeah, great, thanks, man." I said, "It's Trevor Horn, what's your name?" And he said, "Derek May." And I went, "Not Derek May from Detroit?" And he went, "Yeah." So I'm up in Studio One with some guy. I said, "Man, we've just been talking about you. Will you do the rhythm track on this Steel song?" He said, "Yeah, sure." So that weekend he came in. He did the He did the rhythm track for me in the beginning. Seal never liked it. I mean, we used it, but Seal never liked it. That's the funny thing.
Well, the way he goes on with the story is that apparently you offered him and the other the other two, to form like a full-on project. And
Might
then,
have done.
And then apparently there was a conversation about what they would do if they were to go on to Top of the Pops.
Right.
And he said, like, we had this chance of going there, and we were like, oh, no. Like, why would we do such a thing? That's not our style. Like, we don't do that kind of stuff. And apparently you said, like, oh, hey, Kraftwerk did it. And they were like, oh, really? Like, And then, and apparently there was like a full contract negotiated or whatever. And after that conversation, it was dropped or whatever. The project was called Intellects or something.
Intellects. You see, that would have probably been with. I might well have said the thing about Top of the Pops, but I was only one part of a machine. You know, there was Paul Morley and my wife, and stuff was going on all the time that I never knew anything about. So that might well have happened. Yeah. Wow. Wow. There you go.
So when you say you're part of a machine, like if you're one of the driving factors in the machine, or actually the namesake of it, like, hey, there's Trevor and the Horn team coming in and all that, it's like, how do you keep track of whatever is going on, and how do you develop the trust to leave certain aspects to other people? Because you can't possibly do it all and know it all and remember it all.
Certainly can't remember it all. Well, you know, I started a record label with my wife. My job was to make the music. So once I'd finished one record, I was off making another record straight away. I'm still the same, and I'm gone. I'm working on the next thing. So I wouldn't know what was going on behind me sometimes. So I suppose that's the way it works. My wife was my manager. She ran the record label too, with Paul Morley. Although they didn't get on very well, they were always fighting, because Paul was very sort of crazy and left field, and my wife was very hard-boiled, and hard-nosed, and business, which is fine. But it's always, you always need a sort of in any situation, you should always have an uneasy truce between money and creative. If either of them gets too strong, everything goes to shit. If they're both pulling against each other, it always works better. You can't just be stupid and do. I've met loads of bitter people who've made records and never seen any money from the. You don't want to do that. But then again, you can't just do everything for money. Some of the things that have been the most successful, Moments in Love. I had no idea Moments in Love would turn into a kind of classic track that still sells now. I mean, it was just messing around, trying something, seeing if we could do something that was more ambient with what we had. So I guess that's what I would say about that. You should always have a tension between the two things. If creative people are completely in control and stamp all over the financial people, it never lasts long. And if it's the other way round, then creativity is stifled and you don't get hits. So you have to be in a state of conflict all the time, I think, really.
It's pretty painful, but I don't know how you guys are doing. Like, can we go on for like another?
Oh, wow. Jesus, 6 o'clock. I didn't realize we should stop. I thought this was only meant to go until 5 o'clock. Take this mic.
No, it's okay. The batteries, we're taking a bit longer.
It got on for so long, the batteries are flat. That was a daft thing, really, doing that record. I should never have done it. It was one song for Grace Jones's greatest hits, and I met Grace, and I kind of got a bit carried away. Bruce had written the song, but the song was quite different to that. It was very, work all day as men who know. It was very robotic, and I didn't like it. Chris Blackwell wanted me to do it, but I wasn't very keen on it. And I thought, Slave to the Rhythm, what rhythm would I be prepared to be a slave to? And the only rhythm at the time I would be prepared to be a slave to was go-go beat. The go-go beats, that was happening in Washington. And I really loved that stuff. So I got Chris Blackwell to get me a go-go rhythm section. So part of the rhythm section was from Experience Unlimited, the two percussion players, and a couple of the other guys were from Chuck Brown and the Soul Searchers, and I got them in a studio in New York, and I realized pretty quickly that there was no way that they were going to be able to do an arrangement, like an arrangement where things changed. They were used to just getting up and playing for an hour, just anything. So I tried to teach them the arrangement of that song. It was hopeless. But there was one bit when we were setting up where they just played a groove, and they played that groove, and I thought that groove was great. And Bruce rewrote the song over it completely. Put those beautiful chords, which are, he had a JX8P and it had that fifth sound, fat fifth sound on it, and those inversions of those chords that he played is a lovely sound. And you play that over the go-go beat, that sounded great to me. So we made a drum loop. It was the first time I'd ever really done that. We did it with two Sonys, the same sort of idea as Welcome to Pleasure Dome, but we just made the drum track up, and it was across 8 tracks like a normal recorded drum track was, except it was made up in edits. It took us 2 days in the Hit Factory to make the drum track up. And it's not actually in time. If you put it in Pro Tools and analyze it, you see that one bar's slightly longer than the other, and that caused problems playing on it. We didn't realize at the time, but every time somebody came to play on it, it always took longer than you thought, because you'd have to get into the way it seemed when you actually play. You don't so much hear it when you play it. You might hear it now that I've pointed it out, but when you played on it, it had the effect that it was hard to lock in sometimes. We took ages making that. I mean, we went so over the budget, and but it worked. I mean, it was a lovely record. When Grace came to sing it, I always remember that she was 3 days late, and she phoned me up and she said, "I've just had a row with Dolph Lundgren, or the boyfriend, and I've set fire to all his clothes, so I won't be able to make it to the record."
I will crush you.
I will crush you, yes. So I said, "Oh, Grace, come on, come to New York, man. We got a really good track on the go. Come on and sing." So she showed up on a Sunday, and we played it to her, and she said, "Boy, this is different from the other version." And I said, "Yeah, it's very different." And then she said, "But you know what it reminds me of? It's like I've been working all day, and I'm in the fields picking, and I'm sitting down on the porch, and whatever." And I had Bruce Woody, standing about a yard away from her. And the music started, and Bruce would say the line, "Work all day." And Grace, "Work all day, as men who know." And she did it in this sort of voice that sounded like she had been working all day. And it was one of the few times Steve Lipson and I ever danced together, because we were so overjoyed. We were literally jumping around in the control room holding each other, because we'd spent days on it, and I'd got into trouble. My wife had told me I was an idiot for spending so long and everything. But, when you hear the singer, because, when you make records, you really don't know if you've got a record until the person sings it. And nowadays, I'm draconian. I won't do a record with somebody who can't sing. It's too much of a pain in the neck. When I was young, I'd take it as a challenge, but now I'm too old. And until, anybody can make backing tracks. Well, I'm not anybody, but backing tracks are easy compared to getting the vocal and getting a hit vocal. And so we didn't know if it was going to work, But the minute she opened her mouth, the first 2 lines, we just knew, oh, thank God, it's going to work. It's going to work. We'll be all right, Because I was worried, I was really worried about it. It's still like that I just did a Seal album, the Seal's new soul album. And boy, the difference listening to Seal, when we did the first Seal album, Seal was like a puppy dog. He was young and he could sing. His voice was brilliant. But I wasn't prepared for how well he could sing now, 20 years on, loads of gigs. It took my breath away sometimes how good he was, how much he'd learned in those 20 years since I first recorded him. And Grace always had loads of character, and if anybody tries singing Slave to the Rhythm, it's actually very little range in it. There's only about a fifth, because Grace doesn't have a big range. And the only way we could get a climax out of it was by getting it to go, here's Grace, at the end of it, which was an idea I had after seeing her on a Johnny Carson show, where he went, here's Johnny, and it was, here's Grace. That gave us a climax. Anyway, here we are, 6 o'clock. We're not even out of the 80s.
I mean, that's the thing. Probably, I'm not really sure whether Grace is the right example, but to anyone who wants to go out there and record vocalists, do you got like a quick free highlight tips on how to treat vocalists in the studio?
Well, absolutely. For kickoff, I always used to say, if I gave a talk on how to record a vocal, the technical part of it would last 15 seconds. Get a valve microphone and a valve preamp. You can't go wrong with with a good valve mic and a good valve preamp. But the most important thing is for the singer to feel comfortable, relaxed, and to know in their heart that you think they're a really good singer. If you work with somebody and you let them know in any way that you don't think they're very good, you won't get a good vocal out of them. You've got to find some way of saying to them, you can't be obvious, just some kind of way of making them think that you really dig their voice. I mean, that's the first thing. Bullying never gets you anywhere. Losing your temper never gets you anywhere. Getting cross with singers for getting it wrong all the time never gets you anywhere. It's got to be nice. It's got to be fun. You've got to every time a singer sings a song, you have to react straight away. The minute the tape stops, you've got to give them input. You've got to, that was great. Oh, you lost it a bit on the chorus, but the verse was great. Anything. You cannot leave it silent. You cannot be silent after a take. You've got to keep encouraging them. And if they start to lose it a bit, everybody's the same. They'll sing a song 3 or 4 times, or 3 times maybe. And then they'll start, then they'll just be reading the lyrics. They won't be singing the lyrics properly. So what you do is you can give them a break. Talk about the song. Talk about anything. Tell them some stupid story. Anything. Get their mind off the song for a second, and then let them come back to it, and they'll suddenly be singing the lyrics again. I try and get people. I say, who are you singing this song to? Imagine the person's there. Talk to them. Sing it to the person. To put the meaning into it. I'm also, one of the reasons I only work with, a few times I've worked with singers who shall remain nameless, who insist on doing things, in a way, you're pulling them out, insist on doing vocals in loops, loop the first line, sing the first line 10 times, loop the second line, sing the second line 10. I loathe that. I hate that. I like people to sing the song all the way through, and if they can't sing it all the way through, then they will go home and learn it and come back and sing it all the way through. Because when you sing a song all the way through, you understand the song, you understand how to give it dynamics. If you sing it in bits, it's not the same. It's dreadful. I try no more than 7 takes. If I can keep it down to 7 takes, that's my ideal. And then I'll spend 2 days putting together the vocal from the 7 takes. It's a question of, I worked with one guy when I was doing an album for Mona Lisa Smile. The guy who, he's not a bad singer either. He had a big hit with that song, with a girl on the beach, half naked. What was her name? I can't remember. Anyway, he insisted on doing 50 odd takes. And I remember trying to get through 50 takes of this song. In the end, I just looked at them. Well, those 10 are crap, I can tell from the way they wobble, so I won't even listen to them, But in the end, you don't sort of... Jealous Games. What's his name? He's a good singer, Chris Isaac, that's it. He's a good singer. He's just... Wicked Games, that was it. He was just very paranoid, And I find, too, with American singers, especially if you're not their normal producer, and a few times, I did the song for the end of Pearl Harbor with Faith Hill, Everywhere I Go There You'll Be. I mean, I have to earn a living. And it was a good song. And it was a really good song, and Faith Hill's a really good singer. But she was terrified because she worked with a producer that she worked with all her life. And until they know that you're going to get their voice sounding right, they're always paranoid. But, on the other side of it...
How do you avoid lying?
Pardon?
How do you avoid lying to them?
I don't avoid lying to them, I lie to them. But only white lies. Nice lies. There's nothing wrong with lying in the right environment. What you get? I mean, we all tell lies. How do I look in this dress? Fabulous. How was that? Great. Could be a little bit better, What I try, I have a few things I try not to say to them. I try not to say, you're out of tune, because that's so hopeless, because they're trying to sing in tune. I think the main thing is that you always got to give people the feeling that it's going to work, It's going to work. And, sometimes, I mean, I did a track with Yolanda Adams for the end of another movie, and I remember she came and sang it about 5 times, and she didn't find it easy. And when she heard the vocal comp, she hugged me so hard, she hurt me. She was so pleased. And one time when I did Downtown Train with Rod Stewart, he had a problem with one line in it. And when he heard the comp, and I'd moved his voice a little bit in the machine, he picked me up and ran around the room with me. He was so pleased because, and once you do that for a singer once, then there's never any doubt after that, and you're fine. You can say whatever you want and do whatever you want because you're both there for the same thing. You want to get this vocal recorded. I don't have any ego. I've also been lucky because I have a fairly crap voice, but I can sing. And the thing is, I can sing a song, and it's not completely non-threatening. People are always going to sing it better than me, and that can be very helpful.
Right, so work on your non-threatening singing voice. I want to give everyone the chance to ask questions, and obviously there's like a lot of abstract and theoretical things to talk about, maybe later when you're hanging around as well. And I mean, there's countless things that we did not touch on, from like... Where's this coming from? Crazy. And I mean, it could be like... Yeah, from God knows, Robbie Williams, Bell and Sebastian, Texas, John Legend, Simple Minds, countless Seal albums, resurrecting house classics with the Pet Shop Boys. But jumping into the 21st century, there was also this bit here. Can you remind me again what Paul Morley wrote that upset you so much about the Buggles?
Dirty old men with modern mannerisms.
So you really...
Sounds a dirty old man. Yes, I actually had to get a couple of newspapers to retract things that they wrote about me after this, because they implied that these girls were 13 years old, and they weren't. They were 17 or 18 years old, and they were very worldly girls as well. Very nice girls, very very charming girls. We had, even though they couldn't speak much English, they would always. I think they saw me as an ally because I was always nice to them. They said, Trevor, cigarette. They get me to give them a cigarette, As their manager was a bit of an asshole, and I'll say that. He was one of those. He was what I think the papers thought that I was. There was a big Russian record, it sold about 1 million copies, and it's quite similar to the record that I made, if you listen to it, but quite profoundly different as it goes along. Because I think the version that I did gets better as it goes along, and the Russian one kind of gets worse. It doesn't go anywhere. And it was an idea, a guy called Martin Kurzenbaum. I went to a meeting with Jimmy Iovine, who runs Interscope Records, and to see if there was any work kicking around. Basically, my wife sent me, said, go and see Jimmy. He used to be a producer. He always likes to see you. And this guy, Martin Kurzenbaum, he was head of marketing. As I was going out, he said, can I show you this video, these girls? And he showed me the video for They're Not Gonna Get Us. And he said, we've sold 1 million albums in Russia. We've never sold this many albums in Russia. And we want to do an English version of it. And but we'll need English lyrics. And he said, we haven't got any money. And so I said, well, if I can write the lyrics, have half the song, then sure, I'll do it for whatever money you've got. And and it was one of those things that you start, and it was a hard job. Just listening, I had to listen to the first one where it's just for one, whatever it was. Evidently, Russian has 32 consonants or something in it. It took me a while to get the idea for the lyric, but the lyric was about two girls who were falling in love with each other. My eldest, my second, I've got 3 daughters. My 21-year-old daughter is a lesbian, and a very bold lesbian, and she was thrilled with this record. She felt like I just, I went up so much in her estimation when I did this record. But I got a lot of grief from quite a few people who thought they called me a pornographer or something in the paper. I made them retract it because I said, I didn't do the video, I didn't make them kiss, I just made the record. I'm not a pornographer. They called me a promoter of gay sex, all kinds of stuff.
But I mean, you were kind of used to that. You had that like 20 years before already.
With Frankie, yeah, but I'd forgotten about it. And by this point, I had 4 children, and I was a lot older. And I wasn't prepared for it. And the Frankie thing, this was, when you got daughters, the idea that somehow you're a bit pervy really made me angry, So I was more concerned about this than I was about Frankie. But they were fun. They were sweet girls, but you don't know how difficult it is to sing in a foreign language. I mean, it really is one of the hardest things to do. And I had that opening lyric, I'm in serious, I feel totally lost. I mean, it's shit, but if I'm asking for help, it's only because. And they'd be, I'm in serious shit, I am totally lost. And I just keep singing it to them. I'm in serious shit, I feel totally lost. Serious shit, lost, And this went on for quite a while. And the manager, who I referred to previously as a bit of an asshole, said, you're not your problem. Your problem, you're too soft. You need to be strong with these girls. You need to show them, tell them. I said, well, look, if you think you can do better, you have a go, right? So he went in, and of course, within 5 minutes, both girls are weeping, crying. He's shouting. And then, of course, he went, and we went back. I'm in serious shit. I feel totally serious shit for hours. But we got it in the end. It took a long time, and they were game. They in the end we ended up finishing the record in my house. I've got a place in LA that has a studio in it as well. A house I've had it for 20 years, and we call it the Magic Cupboard because another session was going on downstairs in my house, so we had to do their vocals in the cupboard upstairs, and. So to this day, it's called the Magic Cupboard, because of course the record did incredibly well. We sold 7.5 million albums or something off the back of that single. It surprised me. I had no idea it would be so big.
But before you knew that, during the recording, I mean, that doesn't really sound like the kind of job you want to, get up for in the morning. Like, did you at any stage during the project go like, fucking hell, like, why on earth am I doing this to myself?
Oh, well there was a point with this project, because there was a point with it where we'd finished it, we'd spent all the time, and it hadn't worked for whatever reason. I couldn't figure out the chorus, and I had a very complicated lyric on the chorus that went, all the things she said running through my head while I'm lying in my bed, and there's something's red in red, and I'm at this, and it didn't work. And we all kind of gave up a bit, while we tried. And then I went back. I remember, same thing, let's have one more go at it. I went back to the Russian record and I listened to it, and I realized that they'd repeated one line over and over again. And I thought, well, that's the way to do it. All the things she said, running through my head, running through my head, running through my head. But the problem was they'd gone back to Russia and they hadn't sung it. But thank God for technology. A new program had just arrived, Pitch in Time or something like that it was called. And you could pitch things, so we repitched their voices to make them sing the tune, the right lyrics. So a lot of that's, their voices are... The vocal track of that, I should get the multi-track. The vocal track of that is like a work of art. Rob Orton, who worked with me at the time, mixes Lady Gaga now. He does all of her stuff. He sort of cut his teeth on that, and we did all kinds of things. We found the problem with them was that they couldn't pronounce certain English syllables in English. So I got an American singer to sing the song with a girl that had a rock voice. And then you would never know it, but occasionally I used bits of her voice. I'd use the start of one of the Russian girls, but then a syllable would be from somebody else. What can you do? It needed to be finished. I had to do it. I told them.
Yeah, it just makes you feel like you wanted to play one of your Pet Shop Boys tunes now and again. Then it's gonna be all right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But before we go, I mean, obviously we could go on for hours, but
Yeah, we have.
But I mean, you're really earning your money here. That's for sure. Yeah. Other questions from your side? And do we have a microphone for that? Bueller? Questions? Anyone?
Don't worry, you don't have to.
Hi. I didn't really know a lot about your music before. Then today, Pio-san, I realized some of the music I've been heard before is quite popular. Then I really want to know how is the beginning you get involved with the music scene? Like, you just bass player, you like music, or?
Well, I suppose, I like music, but I was always fascinated by recording studios. So whenever I played on a session, I'd always ask them to let me go into the control room so I could sit at the back and watch what they were doing. You see, back then, we're talking about the mid-70s, 73, 74, 75. There was no course for being a producer. You couldn't go on a training course. Now you can, people train. But when I started, there was no way. So I didn't know how to do it. And you couldn't find out because the only place you could make a record was a recording studio. And recording studios back then were very expensive places. So it was like a chicken and egg. What do you do first? How do you get into a studio without knowing what you're doing? And I think for me, what happened with me was I became a musical director for somebody, Tina Charles, and her publisher, and I put her band together, and everybody liked the band so much that they said to me, like songwriters, some songwriter friends of mine said, can we use you and your band to record our songs? And so, we'd play their songs, and this song might be a bit crappy, and we'd make it sound better. And kind of that's how I started doing it, really. The writing thing, I used to write songs when I was 16 or 17. I was a dreamer, and I wrote songs. But then I stopped for years, So that's kind of how does that explain it at all?
And I also want to know, like, you've been mentioned, like, you work with a singer who speak different languages.
Yeah.
Then you want them singing with English. Like, as a singer, I want to ask, like I speak Chinese. Like, English is not my language. So,
Yeah.
so if I sing only sing Chinese, is that gonna take to anywhere else, or?
Well, China's a pretty big place. There's a lot of I don't think they pay for records, though, do they?
Yeah, nobody really buy music anyway. So.
But sometimes it can work for you singing in a different language, because I kind of, when I wrote the lyrics for all the things she said, I kind of purposely wrote them in a way that made them sound like they were a bit of a translation, because I didn't think that the Russian girls would be able to sing any slang. It would have to be almost like formal language. And you asked me about Propaganda at one point. Propaganda were a German band that we had some hits with in the 80s. One of the things that made them interesting was that it was a German guy writing in English. And so he wrote some strange things, but they were interesting. At least it wasn't the same old cliches. I'm a satanic gambler, and you're just the pool. Remember when he told me that lyric? I said, you're just the pool. He said, you're just the pool of money. Ah, right. It's an odd thing. And so, if you want to sing in English, make the Chinese thing work for you.
I don't really want to sing in English. That's the point.
All right.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Yeah, you were like one of the first on the cutting edge of analog synthesizers and programming and stuff.
Yeah.
And have you dumped all that stuff in 2011, or do you still use it?
No, in a way, we've sort of just gone back to. I've gone, but I'm bored with programming, so I try and play everything now. I find playing much more fun, and I think synthesizers have taken a turn for the better. I've just bought Dave Smith Prophet 8. It's a really lovely thing, and you know, I did a Pet Shop Boys record about 4 years ago called Fundamental or something. I think it was called Fundamental, and really. The first thing that we did, Tim and I did, was we just took all their MIDI and stopped it, and you know, they'd programmed it on plugins. We took all their MIDI and used old analog synths. And to me, it just sounds so much better. It's like, you know, I don't like plugins. I don't really like you know, I mean, they sound all right and they're a good way round, but they're a good way around carrying all of that equipment around. They don't sound right to me. And they never have the dynamics.
And then, how'd you feel about Planet Rock when it came out?
Planet Rock?
Yeah.
Africa Bambaataa, I loved it. I met him in a nightclub in New York in 1982. Just after, I think Planet Rock was being pretty much a hit at the time. Malcolm McLaren introduced me to him, and I said to him how much I liked the record, and I said, "Who are your favorite band?" And he said, "The Guess Who." I was like, Guess Who? The Guess Who are a Canadian rock band that turned into Bachman Turner Overdrive. I said, you like the Guess Who? I wouldn't have thought that. And he said, oh man, it's a live album's got the best drum break on it ever. I said, oh, right, you like the drum break. So when JJ did played me the beatbox loop first off, which is a loop of Alan White, from Yes, I knew that Africa Bambaataa would love it. I knew the people in New York would like it.
I stole that loop for a song on my record.
I'll get your name on the way out.
Really quick question, pretty much yes or no. I was really surprised that that you were partly responsible for world famous Supreme Team show. Anyway, the recorded aspect. Did you do Hey DJ?
No, they did that on their own.
Oh, okay.
I only worked with them on that one record, and then they went back to New York. I remember Hey DJ. It was quite a good track.
The piano lick is crazy.
Yeah. Well, they love Dan's piano playing. You see, they went back to when they left England. They got an advance from Charisma Records, £20,000, and they'd insisted on having it in cash. So they were carrying loads of cash with them. The R&B world's all about cash, you know. You've got to pay the cash out. We used Rakim on a Art of Noise record in the 90s, and I remember he wasn't very keen. And then on the phone, I was saying to him, "When are you going to get here?" And he said, "Hey man, well I might make it this afternoon." I said, "Look, I've got $15,000 here in cash." He was there within half an hour. Sometimes you need to muscle it a bit, you know.
Thank you.
Okay. Should let you guys go and eat.
Sorry. You mentioned before when you heard the kind of early demo of Owner of a Lonely Heart that you had an inkling that the chorus was going to be a hit.
Yeah.
Do you feel that, you know, because that was what, 29 years ago or something.
Yeah.
Did you kind of how's your kind of sense of what's going to work later in terms of both what's going to work in the studio and what's going to be a hit? Is that something that's just kind of down to luck? You know, you just work hard, try and make a good record, and then if it's a hit, it's a hit. Or do you kind of hear things and think that's like the one, you know, and have a good sense of that?
I think you have to have a good sense of what might be a hit, because hit basically means that a lot of people liked it. In order for a lot of people to like something, it has to have something special about it. And sometimes can be really hard having an idea when things might be successful and when they won't, because sometimes you know, you have to tell people, I don't think you've got a hit single here. And that can be a very hard thing. People won't accept it, you know, but what can you do? And it still happens, you know. You make a record and there's no hit single. You can't really manufacture that, you know, either. You know, it's got to come from some kind of an inspiration. Somebody has to be inspired. There has to be something. They have to be saying something. The older I get, the more concerned I am, really, with when I listen to songs, with what people are actually saying. What are you saying? What are you saying to people? It's a communication medium. What's your message? The message might be, here, look at me, I'm beautiful and I'm wearing nice clothes. That's fine, you know. There's nothing wrong with that. That's what you're saying, you know. But if you're not saying anything, then it's not going to appeal to anybody, and nobody will be interested. Single songs haven't changed that much. I mean, people tear them apart and reconstruct them and do funny things, and lots of records these days are just made up from a couple of good ideas that are sort of repeated in a good way, you know, with lots of sounds. But they never stay around for as long. Songs, a really good song is quite a rarity. I think every year you might hear two. I have to be honest. I'm always very rude about songwriters, you know, professional songwriters, because I'm the one that has to sort out their crap. You know what I mean? And most of those songs, you know, they're just written from point of view of somebody not really feeling anything. I'd much rather fix up a song that somebody's written. You know, the Lexicon of Love, that album. He written that whole album because when he was at university, a girl had rejected him, Martin Fry. And it was the girl that says goodbye on The Look of Love was the girl that rejected him. We got her in just to say just that one bit. And because she'd rejected him, all of those lyrics are his anger about the rejection. And that's what makes them so potent. And if you don't have that kind of, you know, I don't know what, you know, obviously, if you don't have that kind of communication in the song will never last and nobody will ever like it. And I often get into arguments with people about singles too, because it's not enough to, you know, a good song or a good single should have at least 4 or 5 ideas in it. You can't just do it with 2. You can't have a verse and a chorus. It makes me angry sometimes. I get songs and they're just a verse and a chorus. And there's nothing, what can I do with it? There's no intro, there's no middle 8, and you have to, you know, sometimes you have to make them, you know, you have to figure out the intro, figure out the middle 8, all those kinds of things. And I don't get any songwriting credit for that. The songwriter earns all the money, but they didn't finish it off. If you work with somebody a really good songwriter, professional song, look, if you're going to go with a hooker, you might as well go with the best one. You know, Diane Warren, right, always gives you at least 4 or 5 ideas, you know. But still, I'd still rather fix up a song that somebody wrote from pure inspiration, you know.
Well, I guess we have some special lyrics right after everything's done here and the cameras are shut down. But first of all, we sincerely hope there was a little bit of inspirational piece in the past hours. And
I'm sorry, I hope I didn't go on for too long.
And we very much thank you. Trevor Horn, everybody.